All right. Good morning, everyone. Bonjour à tous. Welcome to this morning's special audit committee meeting. We're here today to consider one item. It is the follow-up report on the agile audit of the Lansdowne 2.0 redevelopment Sprint 1. Auditor General Natalie Goujon will introduce the item, and Deputy Auditor General Joanne Gorenstein will provide a presentation for about 10 to 15 minutes. After the presentation, the OAG will take questions from committee members, followed by other members of council. City staff will be available to answer questions following the questions to the OAG. We'll then vote to receive the report and send it to council for consideration. Thank you, everyone. We have no regrets. I'll ask the committee coordinator to call the roll.
Councillor Brown.
Here.
Councillor Carr.
Here.
Councillor Hill.
Present.
Councillor Kavanagh.
Present.
Councillor Kitts.
Here.
Vice Chair Hubley.
Here.
Chair Curry.
Here.
You have quorum, Chair.
Thank you. Declarations of interest. I've received none. So we move to item 3. Just as an initial housekeeping matter, I'll ask for a motion to add the Office of the Auditor General report to the agenda as they were distributed and published after the agenda. Vice Chair Hubley, could you please move that motion?
Sorry. Be it resolved that the Audit Committee approved the addition of the report entitled The Office of the Auditor General Follow-Up Audit of Lansdowne Sprint 1, distributed and published on November 3rd, 2025, pursuant to subsection 89, bracket 3 of the Procedures Bylaw, being bylaw number 2025-100, to allow for consideration of this matter.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Is that carried? Carried. All right. Thank you. I don't have any motions that anyone's put forward here today. And the presentation, I will move to the Office of the Auditor General.
Merci beaucoup, Madame la Présidente et chers membres du comité et du Conseil.
Thank you very much.
The report that we will be presenting to you today is the follow-up to a report of the audit of the Lansdowne 2.0 Sprint 1. Before we get started, I'd like to say a few thank yous. I'd like to thank city staff, first of all, for their assistance throughout the course of our follow-up work over the past few weeks. Don't usually do this, but I think in this particular case, it's warranted. I'd like to give a particular shout out to a few individuals, being Isabel, James, Sean, Karina, and Justin for their time. It's been an extremely busy period for them, and obviously our follow-up procedures added to that very busy period. So we'd like to thank them for that. That being said, I'd also really like to thank my team for their incredible efforts. This was very complex work that we were doing. We had very short time frame to do this. If you can imagine, a lot of our work could only be done once the staff report was published. And obviously it had moving deadlines as well as ever-changing information. So as Auditor General, I'm really proud of my team for the work that they've done, and very proud to be surrounded by such intelligent and passionate and dedicated staff. Especially this lovely lady to the left of me here, which let's just say we're all a little sleep deprived, so bear with us throughout the next little bit. Prochaine diapositive, s'il vous plaît. As you may recall, the first sprint from the Agile audit of the Lansdowne 2.0 redevelopment was added to our 2022-2023 audit work plan as a result of a motion that was unanimously passed in 2022. This motion requested that I consider conducting an agile audit of the Lansdowne project with emphasis on budget, estimated costs, funding strategies, as well as project agreements. As such, the first sprint that we conducted focused on key elements and assumptions forming the basis of the financial due diligence performed to support the approved Lansdowne 2.0 proposal. After presenting that report to committee and council last summer, we committed to reporting back on the actions taken by management as a result of our report. That report contained 2 recommendations, only one which has come due, which is recommendation number 2. This recommendation was to have city staff take into consideration recent actual results and modest future assumptions to update the pro forma projections for the partnership. This information and the potential impact on the waterfall distributions available for debt servicing and/or city services should be provided to council for their information. In addition to reviewing this recommendation, or the actions taken to address this recommendation, I should say, we also reviewed the updated construction costs and related estimates, which were included in the scope of our original audit. So just to summarize, the work that we performed was limited to follow-up procedures on the updated costs and financial projections relating to Lansdowne 2.0. The risks and opportunity costs in our report, and that we will walk you through this morning, are focused entirely on these financial elements and did not assess the benefits or other costs of the project, as these were not included in the scope of our original audit. Further, it is also important for me to note that our report does not draw any conclusions as to the importance or priority given to the Lansdowne 2.0 project, nor are we making any suggestions as to the future direction of this project. Such suggestions or directions would be outside the mandated afforded to me as Auditor General. Our report is meant to highlight the risks we believe exist with specific project-related costs and financial assumptions, as well as opportunity costs, as requested through the 2022 motion. This information is meant to aid council in making an informed decision. So, as I like to say, it's just one more tool in your toolbox in that decision-making process. With us today, we have, obviously I have my team members, but we also have Melissa Fournier, and she's a partner with BDO. You may remember her for those that were around the table last summer. She was part of our team that conducted the original audit. We also have online with us Satish Kumar, and he is a director with BDO in the Construction Advisory Services Group, focusing on forensic disputes and investigations. They will be happy to assist us in answering your questions at the end of the presentation. So I will now pass the presentation over to Deputy Auditor General Joanne Gorenstein and Audit Principal Atul Arora to walk you through the results of our work. Merci.
Next slide, please. Thank you, Natalie, and good morning all. Since our first sprint, a tender price has been received for the construction of the Lansdowne redevelopment. The overall estimated project cost is now $418.8 million for the event center and Northside stands and $19.2 million for the parking. These figures include a 10% contingency allowance, which aligns with the city's estimating guide. However, we believe this contingency represents the minimum buffer for a project of this magnitude and duration. An analysis was done to review similar construction projects in recent history. It was noted that larger scale projects have generally shown cost overruns due to schedule elongation, scope evolution, and interdependency delays. From review of the draft construction contract, there were key risks identified with regards to the construction costs that we wanted to highlight. Cost escalation risks exist, as the contract allows for a wage and material cost escalation related to city-caused delays. Key common risks for cost escalation stem from design and scope changes that may materialize from unclear or evolving requirements. This risk is heightened by the length and complexity of the project. Additionally, price escalation due to tariffs is an ongoing risk. Tariffs on essential materials have the potential to increase costs and disrupt supply and may result in budget overruns, project delays, claims, and disputes. Despite having a tariff management plan, any price impacts of tariffs are the city's responsibility. Interdependency risks exist, as numerous elements of the redevelopment have structural, access, or serving dependencies, and any misalignment or delay in a single component can lead to increased costs and schedule risks throughout the project. Given these concurrent pressures, maintaining only a 10% contingency exposes the project to the risk of budget insufficiency should multiple risk events overlap. This contingency amount may not fully capture cumulative escalation over 5 years of construction combined with tariff or coordination impacts. One recommendation was issued to ensure that there are approaches in place to manage risk of the construction costs and to provide annual updates to council on the financial status of the project, including the contingency. Next slide, please. The staff report proposes the funding strategy for the $418.8 million of construction costs we have previously discussed. The table on the slide summarizes the various funding sources, including the $331 million of debt that is proposed to be issued. The first area that we focused on was the proceeds from the sale of air rights. Our review of the draft purchase and sale agreement highlighted penalties of up to $13 million at key milestones if the city fails to meet its contractual timelines. As outlined in the previous slide, this is a key interdependency of the EBC construction. With regards to the air rights, $10 million has been allocated to the 140 underground parking stalls to being constructed under the Northside stands, as these spaces are being made available for residential units. This allocation is reducing the basis for the calculation of the contribution to affordable housing by $5 million. We wanted to raise this as there's a risk that this is not aligned with council's expectations and the original motion to allocate a portion of the proceeds from the sale of the air rights. We issued a recommendation for the city manager to confirm with city council that this internal allocation is appropriate for the purposes of calculating the contribution to affordable housing and is aligned with the intent of the original motion. Lastly, we did highlight that one source of funding was reserves of $15.6 million. This is a combination of citywide capital reserves and stormwater reserves. While this allocation does reduce the amount of debt the city is required to take on, it represents an opportunity cost to the city as this funding could be used to meet other municipal needs. I will now pass the presentation to Joanne. Next slide, please.
Good morning. As noted in the previous slide, $17.4 million is the annual debt repayment for the 40-year bond of $331 million for the Events Center and Northside Stands. Funding sources identified to support the repayment of debt include proceeds from net new residential and hotel tax uplift, return of city equity from the waterfall based on projected net cash flows, and various city investments. Firstly, the city plans to allocate 75% of annual municipal property tax revenue generated from the project's new residential and hotel developments towards funding annual debt repayment. The amount of $68.9 million is based on a residential and hotel unit count of 770, which is based on recent designs from Marabella and an assumed 50-50 split between condominium and rental units. Should the split change, this could impact the amount of property tax available to fund the debt. In a scenario where the condominium market is weaker and Mirabella lands on a mix of 30% condominiums as opposed to the currently estimated 50%, projected revenues for residential and hotel property tax uplift would decrease by 4.2% or $2.9 million. We also acknowledge that a 1% increase in the municipal accommodation tax is being proposed to both help fund the construction cost and the debt repayment. This allocation of funds from the municipal accommodation tax to the project represents a potential opportunity cost to the city in the case where the increase in the tax rate would have been approved irrespective of Lansdowne 2.0. Finally, after consideration of the various sources to fund the city's debt from redevelopment, there is an $82.7 million of city investment required, which equates to $4.3 million per year over the life of the debt. This required investment is considered an opportunity cost as the funds could otherwise be used to advance other municipal services or priorities. It should be noted that the city's primary approach to fund the $17.4 million in annual debt repayment is to build up a budget available specifically for repayment of the Lansdowne 2.0 debt. Between 2024 and 2036, an additional $1.3 million of budget pressure will be added. This means that by 2070, $331 million in net present value or $694 million in face value will have been budgeted for debt repayment. This was done because it was acknowledged that the debt repayment would start after 2030, while several of the other sources of funds would only be realized later during the term of the debt. This guaranteed source to fund the debt repayment could represent an opportunity cost. However, establishing this budget enables all resulting excess from the other sources of funds to be available for city services. Next slide, please. The city has indicated that the investment in Lansdowne 2.0 coupled with the amendments to the partnership agreement are expected to generate positive cash flows such that the city's return on equity would be $118.4 million over the life of the debt. While there are a number of sources of cash for the partnership, the majority is represented by the projected net cash flows coming from operations. The most significant contributor to net cash flows is the retail, representing existing and net new retail stemming from the redevelopment. Consistent with 2023, the city engaged EY to provide retail projections based on their subject matter expertise. From the limited procedures we performed, the retail revenues and expenses assumptions embedded in the financial projections do appear reasonable. Expected short-term and long-term growth in revenues for the Red Blacks over the life of the partnership also contribute positively to the projected net cash flows. In our 2024 audit, we highlighted potential risks with Red Blacks' short-term and medium-term revenue projections and quantified the potential risk associated with not achieving them. Aligned with the recommendation from our audit, for specific 2025 OSEG projections, the city has undertaken an exercise to take a more conservative approach to net cash flows. We reviewed the city's updated assumptions and projections, assessed their alignment with available data and historical trends, and highlighted areas of continued risk that could have a significant impact on the city's waterfall distributions if the projections are not realized. This includes Red Black's short-term revenue and expense growth projections. We quantified the risk of a more conservative short-term growth rate given actual historical results, and the impact was an estimated decrease of $53 million and $31 million respectively available to the city over the course of the partnership. Finally, similar to our 2024 audit, it was recognized that the expense growth assumptions across all business units were one of the most sensitive of the inputs to the model. As such, in 2025, we quantified the risk that the long-term operating expense growth rate for the Red Blacks and the Stadium and Event Center business lines could only be stabilized at 2.25% instead of the projected 2%. In this case, the impact would be an estimated decrease of $31 million in waterfall distributions to the city. Overall, the challenge with projected operating cash flows from the waterfall is the time horizon of the projections. As the city's projections go out to 2075, it is challenging to assess the reasonability of assumptions over such a long time period. We issued one final recommendation to annually review and update the financial projections for the partnership and report the potential impact on waterfall distributions to council. Next slide, please. This concludes our next slide, please. Sorry. This concludes our presentation. We would be pleased to answer questions from committee members or other councillors. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And just before we go to delegations, I did want to just say a personal thanks very much to the Auditor General, the Office of the Auditor General, for releasing this early to councillors on Friday and then releasing it to the community early on Monday when you didn't have to do that. You could have just tabled this report here right this moment without anybody getting to read it ahead of time. So thank you very much for doing that.
Thank you. And I appreciate you all being okay with receiving a draft, because if you could imagine, we worked until Monday morning, modifying and making, obviously nothing significant, but making modifications. It's been a team effort. One I hope we don't ever have to repeat, though.
No kidding. Well, that's preferable than only getting it now. So we really appreciate that. And then the other is that I appreciate that you've changed the date or made sure the date here happened before the vote on Friday at council so that the community could come out to 2 different committees to delegate. I know the community was appreciative of that, so I'll just say that on their behalf. And I now would want the committee to know that we also had one correspondence for this committee from Dennis H.J. Caro, and then we have 8 delegations today, and we will start with those delegations, and then we will go to questions. All right, so our first delegation is Neil Saravanamuthu. All right, whenever you're ready, we'll start the clock.
Thank you, Chair. It's been a busy. I'd like to thank the AG for clarifying some of the misinformation circling, or as Councillor Tierney has called it, the spaghetti out there. I like that phrase. And I want to start out with this issue of opportunity cost, which we just heard about. Now, the AG has noted about those debt payments that we're making that, and I'll quote, "This represents an opportunity cost as those funds could be used for other city services." Let me repeat that. Those funds could be used for other city services. Now, Councillor Hill, you challenged me at Finance Committee last week and subsequently explained it as, and I quote, "What I challenged you on was misinforming the public about how you could say no to Lansdowne and still have $416 million to spend on other priorities, which is not at all how this works, given that no Lansdowne 2.0 equals no revenue generation from events." Now that the AG has said clearly that the money we are borrowing for Lansdowne could be spent elsewhere, as did the report the week before, do you stand by your words or that I am misinforming the public, or do you wish to retract those?
Mr. Saravanamuthu, you're not able to ask questions of councillors. You are presenting and they can ask you questions. That's how this works.
Sure. Okay, Councillor Kitts, you wrote something similar referring to the property tax revenue on new residential towers. Without that new, and I quote, without that new stream of tax revenue, there's no pool of extra money to help finance all the projects you mentioned. I know that you know this and that this is just spin for your cause. So I would have a similar question. Well, okay, I won't ask Councillor Kitts the same question. But I do have to ask the question that if councillors do not think that there's been errors in what has been previously said, are they even understanding the basics of what they are voting for with Lansdowne 2.0? So last night, Better Ottawa, that's a platform I created for Ottawa residents to work together on issues of shared concern, hosted an open house at the Salvation Army Barhaven Church and Community Center. That was an opportunity for the public to engage in meaningful consultation on the project. And we had over 500 people in the room or participating online. And I'm here to tell you what we heard. People across the city think that this is a bad proposal. We heard that anecdotally. We saw that in new polling data. But more so, people think that this council has crossed a line. Councillors, you can tie yourself in knots trying to explain to your constituents why this is a good idea. But let me quote one delegate from last week, and that is Angela Davis. Her comment, "People will believe Amy." Councillor Curry and Brown, last week you were quick to attack the billionaire owners of the PWHL and apparently suggested that they should be subsidizing the professional sports here. But you were remarkably quiet about the billionaire owners of the Red Blacks and the 67s. You know, I'd like to understand why the same logic does not apply to Roger Greenberg and OSEG. People are seeing this for what it is. It looks a lot like crony capitalism, sweetheart deals. You can spin this however you like, but I think in the court of public opinion, a decision has already been made that this is not the way forward. And people are saying enough is enough. On Friday, a number of civil society organizations are planning a mass rally at City Hall for people to show their discontent with this proposal. 8:30 a.m. Friday morning at the Rink of Dreams. Now you can try to ram through Lansdowne and hope that your constituents don't notice. That's your calculation to make. But this does not end on Friday. With Lansdowne, you have catalyzed a movement of people who expect better from our local government and are now so furious that they're prepared to do something about it. So I am grateful to the AG for confirming that the members of the public who were voicing concerns were right all along. Many of you rushed to call this misinformation, which the AG has shown is not the case. It's time for council members to do the right thing and apologize to those members of the public that they were so quick to denigrate. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions for the delegate? Seeing none. Next delegation is Carolyn McKenzie. Whenever you're ready, we'll start the clock.
Good morning, and thank you for the opportunity to speak today. I'd like to thank the Auditor General's Office for the diligent work in this report under obviously very difficult time pressures. So just a few takeaways from this audit. First, that the 10% cost contingency is obviously a very minimal buffer. The AG seems to suggest that a 25% contingency is more appropriate. This alone would increase costs by $50 million, or roughly $2.5 million a year in debt service costs. Second, that forecasts so far into the future are essentially unreliable. The AG says that the duration of the agreement is a key risk to the waterfall distributions that has been heightened by extending it from 2066 to 2075. Third, that affordable housing is getting shafted again. The plan is to put only $14 million instead of $19 million into affordable housing, thus demonstrating that while we have declared a housing crisis, contributions to Lansdowne are more important than affordable housing. Also, that the construction bid has been clearly rushed. Bidders asked 1,500 questions during the bid phase. This is an eye-popping number of questions, indicating a tremendous lack of clarity in documents and should be a huge red flag. It indicates a bid released in a hurry and an overly complicated procurement. It is sure to introduce risk and quite likely result in litigation and significant additional costs down the road, a situation not unfamiliar to this council. The $46 million are a Class D estimate for the retail podium, and costs are likely to go considerably higher. When they do, higher costs equal higher partnership debt levels, which equal risk to the operating profits and the Lansdowne business model once again. Slide 2, please. I'd like to focus again on the air rights. The AG reports that the success of the residential component of the redevelopment is central to the overall Lansdowne 2.0 business case and funding strategy for construction costs. Further, without the proceeds from the sale of the air rights, there would be no corresponding contribution to affordable housing. This is how you might describe a Jenga puzzle. Pull out a critical piece and you are in danger that the structure itself falls away. In this case, the financial strategy for Lansdowne 2.0. Next slide. The AG discusses the air rights risks in more detail, including the risks and costs around non-performance by the city, and they are considerable. The report also says, although a lower likelihood of materializing, should Mirabella be the one to withdraw from the transaction? I just want to focus on that for a moment. I submit that the risk of Mirabella withdrawing is actually quite high, given such a low deposit of only $1 million, with no further commitment until after the arena is built 3 years later, and even then, only another $4.7 million. I see no evidence that $65 million is likely to be a viable bid and to reach financial close. In fact, just the opposite. We know from media reports that 11 acres of land at Le Breton, serviced by the LRT, was sold for roughly $33 million, about half the price. Given how central the air rights revenue is to the financial strategy, not to mention the actual development, did the city not ask for direct evidence from Mirabella that this is actually a viable bid? Was the AG able to review this? Was the AG able to draw upon other comparables as it did for construction contingencies and the BMO field expansion in Toronto? Respectfully, I am hoping that through this committee, the AG can provide some clarification around this assessment. And if the city did not satisfy itself with actual evidence, that Lansdowne 2.0 not be approved until it can be provided and reviewed by the AG. Last slide. Yesterday, the mayor thanked the AG, but was quoted as saying, it's a big project and the model is over many, many years, so there are always risks inherent in that kind of project, as there are in every other major construction project the city undertakes. But to refer to Lansdowne 2.0 as just another major construction project is troubling at best. Lansdowne requires massive debt, involves complex construction interdependencies, and relies on forecasts far beyond reasonable ranges. The AG has identified major financial risks, but the city just shrugs them off. Why? In my opinion, glossing over these risks and committing taxpayers to spending hundreds of millions of taxpayers' dollars just a year after declaring a financial crisis is a reckless approach. We owe it to residents to do better. We can do better. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions of the delegate? Councillor Menard.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Thanks for your presentation. I'm wondering if you could just elaborate a bit more on what you mean when you're, I guess, looking for evidence that the $65 million bid may not be viable.
Yeah, so the staff report refers to a later stage in the air rights when the bidder, I believe it's not until 2030, will be asked to move forward and make larger financial contributions. But at that point, they will be asked to provide proof of financing, secured financing to move the project forward. So basically, will they be able to go to a bank to finance the development as proposed? But that's well down the road. At this point, if the city has not actually done the work to seek out assurances from the air rights developer that this is actually a viable bid, that $65 million, and to use the industry phrasing, will pencil out this project. That's a huge risk. That's a huge hole in this financial strategy. In my, I'll say, former life, and I'm a retired partner of one of Ottawa's leading infrastructure advisory firms, we ran large transactions. As part of our teams, we had investment bankers, we had lawyers who would go through the procurement strategies and the procurement documents that we had put together. And basically their remit to us as part of our team was tear it apart, find the holes, find the weaknesses, find the points of leverage so that a bidder can, that a bidder could come in and leverage and that would not serve the purposes of the owner who we were working for. And that was, and this is a key example of what I see as a huge, if it hasn't been done, and there's no evidence of it having been done, a huge hole in this area. And as I said, if it falls apart, this is a Jenga puzzle. And in 2 years ago in the staff report, I believe the financial strategy and the description of it was basically, here are all the pieces and they're all important. And if any significant piece falls apart, I don't want to put words in I don't have the staff report right in front of me now, but the message was basically, you pull one important piece out of it, the whole thing falls apart. This is at the core, as per the AG's commentary. This is at the core. This is one of the core pieces. And I don't see how this has much chance of going forward. If there's evidence that the city has to take it off the table, then let's see it. But I don't see it.
Okay, thank you for that. The Auditor General has said that the 10% contingency is a risk, just given the potential for construction cost overruns for a variety of reasons, 3 main reasons. But why is that a concern for you?
Yeah, well, I mean, the obvious, and again, the AG has pointed to this other project in Toronto as a reasonable comparable and said, and I think by way of suggestion, I don't think you have to connect the dots too much to say that I think what she's telling us is that you might want to consider 25% here as a much more reasonable contingency. And why? There are many reasons why. This report also talks about the intricate interdependencies of this project and the risks that brings to the table. But also that, we were told, and the message to the public has been, we have a fixed price contract. We have a fixed amount for the construction contract. Well, as it turns out, we don't. It's one thing to have a dispute mechanism in a contract. That's a normal thing. It's a different thing to actually have a mechanism to say, if costs increase because of tariffs, because of cost escalation related to the situation that we're dealing with south of the border at this point. That's a different situation to have a mechanism that will explicitly say there is an allowance to increase the cost. That's very clear. This is not a fixed price contract. It's a fixed price contract in name only.
Yeah, I guess the fixed price on the hard construction costs, but it's those soft costs that the AG has pointed out are a concern. And then I know that the AG can't make recommendations on
Councilor Menard, is there a question here?
Increase your contingency or not. But certainly staff can make that determination. So appreciate your delegation, and I'll ask staff some of those questions. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you
Great,
very much.
thank you. Seeing no further questions, the next delegate is Katie D'Souza.
Well, Councillor Plant had their hand up. I don't know if no.
Yeah, no, I did. Sorry, I did have my hand up, and then I think when they made me a panelist, it went away. But yes, if Carolyn is still around, I'd like to ask a question if she's still there.
Okay, she'll have to come up to the desk. Sorry,
I
Katie.
appreciate that. Thank you, Chair. Hi, Carolyn. Thank you so much. And I apologize for not having my camera on. I'm having some major computer problems this morning, which is why I got kicked out of the meeting and put back in. First of all, I just want to thank you for your presentation. I personally really appreciate how you explain things and how you go through the report. And it's very easy for people like me to understand your concerns, and I wanted to talk about those. So I actually very much agree with you about the 65 million for the two towers. That just seemed like a number that was a little too pat for what this whole project is looking at. I was wondering if you could again just go back and explain why that number makes or doesn't make sense to you, and what would be a more realistic number.
Well, as I was trying to explain, I think the most recent comparable, again, would be the senator's purchase of 11 acres of land, actual land at Le Breton Flats on a site that is serviced by the LRT. This bid is for twice that amount.
Right.
How does that make sense? I have had meetings with industry people in the last week or so since this was announced, who are all scratching their heads. And as I said last week, after talking with them about their concerns and about their reporting that industry across this city is scratching their heads, can't figure out this number,
Right.
I said, look, would you be prepared, given your expertise, very specialized expertise, to come forward as I'm doing right now? And their answer was, oh, Ottawa's a small town.
Oh, okay. Interesting.
And that is so. What is the right number? I don't know, but again, in my experience, what the city needs to do is actually, or should have done, if it hasn't been done, is to actually have required Mirabella in this case to provide proof through a walkthrough of their pro forma to see if this actually pencils. And that is not an unusual thing to require of bidders, basically to put them through a financial viability assessment as to say, look, so that the city could satisfy itself and staff and whatever outside advisors are being used, whether it's EY or whomever, to satisfy themselves that this $65 million actually has, can I say, a hope in hell
Right.
of coming through.
Okay, thank you so much. And well, correct, I kind of lost your delegation there for a bit and I came back on. So if you addressed this, let me know.
Yeah.
There has been some talk about the province coming in and potentially kicking in some money for this project, which of course I don't think anybody would be opposed to. What sort of dollar amount do you think that would have to be, if any? And would that kind of reassure you a bit if the province came in and said, this is a citywide project, we believe in citywide projects, we're giving you X amount? Like, what amount do you think that should be?
Well, I guess I'd have to, on the fly, that's a bit of a tough question to answer. I guess I'd have to look through and do the pluses and minuses, and they're mostly minuses here, of course, as to what the risks are that we need to be covering. I mentioned that, something in the range of a 25% contingency represents
Right.
a $50 million increase. Or $2.5 million a year in additional debt service. So is the province going to kick in that? I mean, that's a significant risk to be covered off through alternate means of the financial strategy, but that's not the only one, of course. So I don't know what that number would have to look like. It's a number that I'm sure the city could try and come up with to say, to cover us up. But I don't think we're in a world where the province is going to show up with that sort of money. And if it does, again, we're back to a discussion of, is that the priority? We're looking to the province to help us on
Right.
so many issues. If we get support for Lansdowne, I don't think that there's an unlimited bucket of money that the province has for Ottawa. And again, we declared a housing crisis a couple of years ago. We're making some progress there, but not enough.
Right.
And so I think there are other priorities. And so again, it's about choice. We take the province's money, if in fact there is any money, and there's no guarantee of that. we take the province's money for this, and it just means that we're not going to get it for something else. I think that's, it would be naive, I believe, to think otherwise.
Okay, thank you so much. And I do want to just personally thank you for meeting with me and chatting about this. I think you raised some really, really good points, and you can come to my community associations anytime and do similar work. I would love to have you. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you very much, Stephanie, or Councillor Plant, and I appreciated the opportunity to sit down with you as well and to discuss concerns raised. So thank you for that.
Thank you. Katie, sorry about that.
It's all good. I'm happy to wait my turn. I was supposed to delegate to the Finance and Corporate Service Committee last week, but had to cancel because I was home with a sick kid. I'm grateful for those circumstances, as it gave me the opportunity to listen to the other delegations before coming before you today. And what I noticed was that so many delegations, both for and against Lansdowne 2.0, boil down to a moral argument. I think that as a city, we can all agree that the meat of those arguments have merit. Yes, designs should be more inclusive and accessible to the disabled community. Yes, we should be working to preserve green space. Yes, we need more community spaces. Yes, economic development for Ottawa is a good thing. Today, I'm asking you to put all of those arguments aside. What I would like this committee and council as a whole to consider is this: is the financial risk that the city is being asked to absorb worth the payout? Is this a wager worth taking? As the Auditor General's report has stated, given the scope of Lansdowne 2.0, there are multiple points along the path where risk is higher. In layman's terms, where things could go wrong. Ottawa isn't immune to such risks, and it would be foolish to think so. Just look at the struggles that the LRT, another P3 project, has had. And while the report looked at each scenario in an isolated capacity, there is a cascading effect that could occur if parts of this project fall behind schedule or fail entirely. I'm not asking you to imagine some vague scenario where failure occurs. I'm asking you to look to the historic trends within our city and Lansdowne 1.0 to see that the rosy future imagined in the Lansdowne 2.0 plan is not a certain thing. The north side stands must be completed before the air rights for the condo towers can be sold. Without that, Ottawa loses out on the sale of said rights to the tune of $65 million, a major funding source for this project, with the additional possibility of a penalty as well needing to be paid to Mirabella. This alone could increase the costs by up to 20%. Are we expecting no construction delays? We don't need to search far to find an example. The AG report states that the procurement process highlighted this very challenge, with the bid phase extended by 2.5 months and generating over 1,500 bidder questions. If this is in fact a trend, it foreshadows delays and increased costs to the city. Another key revenue source, the projected growth for the Red Blacks, relies on forecasted growth based on vibes, as far as I can tell. The short-term growth rate assumption was estimated at 9.85%, while only hitting 5.07% between 2023 and 2025, and even lower in the years before that. Without that growth, the waterfall distribution to the city will decrease by $53 million. And while Ottawa has a contingency plan, if all of these funding sources fall, what else could that money have done? And what are we, residents of the city, left with? Not only are we not getting the economic boom and increased funding to other projects, transit, affordable housing, and repairing and upgrading the community facilities that we do have, we're left diverting tax revenue that could have paid for some of those needs to a project that will never pay us back. That's what reallocation of opportunity costs means. The residents of this city aren't unified on Lansdowne 2.0, but the deeper you dig, the more the yay position shifts to nay. As reported by the CBC, the Nanos poll commissioned by Councillor Menard revealed that the more people learn the details of Lansdowne 2.0 and how they're going to have to pay for it, the less likely they are to support it. Do some quick math. That's roughly $1,000 out of the pocket of each household of Ottawa to fund Lansdowne 2.0. Municipal elections are around the corner, and if you take time to read any public forum from Facebook to Reddit, you'll find residents vowing to remember this come October 26th next year. If I were sitting in your position, I certainly wouldn't be taking this kind of gamble with Ottawa's finances.
Any questions? I don't see any questions. Thank you for your delegation. Valerie Swinton, online, I believe.
Am I live?
You are. We have
Okay.
5 minutes whenever you're ready to start.
Thank you. I'll start now. I'm not an expert, a financial person, or anything else, and I defer to people like Carolyn and others for that level of information. However, from a 30,000-foot view, several things are clear to me from the Auditor General's report. The financial plan is very high risk. That plan has been presented to us in a complex and carefully crafted way so as to mask those risks. Some revenues are coming from sources that should go into the general tax pot rather than be allocated to a single specific project. So why is this a high-risk project? Last night at the People's Forum on Lansdowne, Professor Ian Lee, who's a well-respected economist in this city, said to a packed house, the plan is a house of cards, and it's based on hocus pocus, unquote. Why does he say that? Well, this has been already stated. The 65 million described to the public as a sale is in reality only an option that allows Mirabella to walk away, leaving a hole in the income stream of between $60 and $64 million. Additionally, predicting revenues and expenses over decades is plainly absurd by any business standard. I also believe that the reports from EY and Deloitte have disclaimers that state that they relied solely on figures supplied by the partnership and that they're based on current economic conditions. With an erratic president in the United States, a country that is still our primary trading partner, and our prime minister warning us that hard times are ahead, it's not a good time to have our heads in the sand. The risks have been buried in complex documents and sadly, even misrepresented by our mayor. Yes, I believe the word misrepresented is appropriate here. Despite Mayor Sutcliffe's declarations that Lansdowne takes no funds from other priorities, the Auditor General makes clear that is simply not true. The hard fact is that $694 million over the term of the contract is coming from capital costs, the municipal accommodation tax, and debt repayment costs that could be spent on much needed other city services. Perhaps this was not revealed because lost opportunity costs were excluded from the scope of these studies. It took the Auditor General to identify this as an issue, and that was after the Finance Committee vote and only several days before the Council vote. Finance Committee should have had this report as input to their decision. Finally, there is little public support for a new Lansdowne project. Nanos Research, a highly reputable survey company, polled 764 citizens about the Lansdowne proposal. It indicates that citizens are strongly against Lansdowne 2.0 as it's been presented to us. The mayor characterized the survey as a political tactic, as misleading and misrepresenting the facts, and said the questions were designed to lead to a predetermined outcome. I encourage you to read the questions and judge for yourself. I have read them and can confirm that they state exactly what the project proposes. And ask yourself, would Nanos risk its reputation by creating a biased survey? No, I don't think so. In conclusion, the City OSEG partnership has pushed staff and council down a narrow path toward a yes vote without any alternative offered, with studies tailored to produce favorable outcomes and with a rushed timeline to assess the plan. The risks identified by the Auditor General a year ago have been only partially attended to. They've even increased with the current plan. Citizens reject this plan and will hold councillors accountable in the 2026 election. Please press the pause button and take the plan back to the drawing board. Thank you.
Thank you for your delegation. Any questions for the delegate? Seeing none, next delegation, Michael C. Wolfson, also online.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
We can. We'll start the clock when you're ready.
Thank you very much, and I appreciate the opportunity to present my delegation to you. First, by way of background, I do have a doctorate in economics, and I spent a lot of time in the federal government doing policy analysis and at Statistics Canada, including doing projections of various sorts, but I do not claim any expertise in Lansdowne 2.0. I've struggled to read through the documents in the last week or so, but that's about it. A key takeaway for me is that the auditor's report raises major concerns about financial risks. In this context, I'm of two minds. On the one hand, I have the clear impression that a majority of council, I hope this doesn't hold out on Friday, wants to move ahead with this project. But in my mind, the best option, as the previous speaker said, would be to defer. There's too much complexity. I found the documents far from being transparent. As the auditor has pointed out, the costs are understated in at least two ways. One is the 10% contingency is too low. And as others have noted, there's all these opportunity costs, which in effect are taking money away from other things that the city could be doing, so that the costs are seriously understated as far as I can tell. The mayor claims that delay will cost money, but I expect that these costs of delay will be quite modest and will be more than offset by comparing to what we might achieve by having a better Lansdowne 2.5, for example. However, since it looks like there's substantial support for going ahead with the current proposal, my second set of thoughts has to do with in the event that it is going to be supported on Friday, what kinds of amendments or motions could members of council put forward to reduce the risk? It's important to project revenues and expenditures, but I can tell you the idea of doing projections half a century in the future based on data for the last 10 or even 2 years is a fool's game. It just doesn't work. It's not reliable. So I wonder if there are some sort of mechanisms that could be embodied and strengthened in the proposal if it were to go ahead to mitigate these risks. I spent time worrying about pension policy. The Canada Pension Plan is it's based on long-term projections, but it has mechanisms for continuous adjustment and reporting. The Auditor General has said that the financials should be regularly audited and all that, but I don't think those have enough teeth. So one of the things that we learned about Lansdowne 1.0 is that OSEG did not do an adequate job of maintenance and upkeep, so that regular inspections of the retail and stadium and events center should be explicitly part of the agreement that the City of Ottawa will do. Regular evaluations, not just audits of all the relevant city revenue streams, especially the Red Blacks Stadium and Event Center. The Auditor General did put this in as their third recommendation. But as I said, it needs more teeth. The financial reports that the city staff will produce need to be much more transparent, certainly compared to what they've been doing so far. And it would be really good if there could be explicit adjustments or mechanisms in the case that the Red Blacks leave or fail, or that retail revenues net of expenses drop significantly, and maintenance and upkeep fall short. One last thing is, it's been pointed out that these 65 million in air rights is highly contingent, and I've heard the suggestion. I wonder if it would be possible, in addition to doing some due diligence on that, is to raise the penalty for Mirabella, I guess it is, from 1 million to 10 or 20 million dollars to reduce the risk of that kind of a default. And lastly, with respect to traffic, I think I saw that the idea is that OC Transpo would offer ticket holders 2 hours of free rides. Why not increase that to 3 hours or more and be more generous? That would presumably cost OC Transpo a bit of money, but
you,
nothing
Michael.
exceptional. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any questions? Councillor Menard.
Just quickly, Chair, thank you very much, Michael, for coming out. And I appreciate your approach on both the issues with the plan as it stands and some of the mitigation options that you've mentioned as well. I did put forward several motions to help, I think, improve the plan if should it go forward. One of those was around oversight on the actual financial dealings of the site. City is an arm's length partner. So they can't get too involved, but there needs to be more oversight. What would you think of having an overarching board similar to many other institutions of this sort across the world that would have more oversight with this financial arrangement, rather than just I guess the annual meetings that occur with the report out annually, to actually have a board that would be able to look at the fiduciary responsibilities to judge those decisions on site of OSEG and the city, and to work in conjunction with those entities to reduce costs.
I'm not familiar in sufficient detail with, the federal government, you call it the machinery of government, with the details of how one would structure such a board, but anything that can be done to give some more oomph or capacity to do this regular monitoring and become aware as quickly as possible if any of the risks are starting to materialize. That would strike me as sort of basic good governance right from the get-go.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Devine has a question for you as well.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Dr. Wolfson, for delegating. I also appreciated the delegation you brought to Finance Committee last week when you identified what you perceived as the fallacy of making a comparison between Lansdowne 2.0 and the cost of doing nothing. That certainly resonated with me. In your delegation here today, you were offering a few suggestions, i.e., deferral. And I'm certainly moved by a delegate earlier that was talking about, is the wager worth taking? And of course, any wager is elevated when there's so much lack of clarity to the wager. At last night's community hall meeting, I know I heard Dr. Ian Lee make reference to why not wait to make such a big decision until we have a clearer landscape with regards to where the future Sens Arena might be, because that might provide more clarity. But if you yourself were talking about the possible benefits of making a better wager, a lower risk wager, if we had more clarity, did you identify a fixed point or an item of clarity that you would be seeking, that you'd be willing, that you think would be more prudent to defer to?
Not in particular, but as I think others have said, there's a lot of moving pieces here, and the external environment, external to Lansdowne, is obviously critical. And if the Senators are going to be building a major stadium in LeBreton Flats, that's going to leave the Canadian Tire Center for something else. So you've got sort of three major facilities here, competing, interacting? It's not clear. So it would sure be nice to have some better feeling for how those are going to play out. But my main concern has been that we don't know what the opportunity cost of doing something different. What would a Lansdowne 2.5 look like? Could we have done something better with lower risk is one thing. And just thank you, Councilor Devine, for reflecting that. But the idea that there's $500 million worth of GDP being added by this project is clearly foolish. I think Deloitte's economists are smart enough to know that that's not the right way to do the analysis. And in fact, they put a disclaimer on the second last page in the fine print. If the city's going to spend $500 million, they could spend it digging holes and filling them up again and still increase GDP. So all of that economic analysis is, from an economics econ 101 point of view, is really kind of silly.
And then the other question, the second question I had, you were saying that assuming that the project does pass forward, rather than deferral, one thing you had been looking for was perhaps motions or amendments that could bring a little bit more certainty to how the city monitors this project moving forward. And I know that the city has accepted the AG's recommendation of regular reviews of the financial projections for Lansdowne. Of course, that's something we already do. We do have those annual staff reviews and projections. And of course, what that, to a certain extent, all that does is it's a documentation of the failure of 1.0 to produce revenues. If you were to make, I think I heard you make reference to one of them, but if you were to recommend two items that could be brought as motions to increase the city's ability to have some teeth, as it were, to how it monitors these revenue projections going forward, could you identify two of them?
Again, I'm not that familiar with all of the mechanisms available to the city in this regard, but when I think what kind of off-ramps are there should things diverge, particularly in a negative direction, it would be very helpful, it seems to me, if those were spelled out in some way in the contractual agreement. I guess there are currently rules about defaults and things like that, but if those could be, the document is just way too complex for me to get a handle on this, but so that's a good reason for deferral in and of itself. But if there were ways to put in some sort of provision that says, here's a way for the city to protect itself if this event should unfold 10 or 15 or 20 years in the future, again, I come back, I spent a lot of time worrying about the Canada Pension Plan and pension policy. There are built-in mechanisms. The chief actuary tables a report in Parliament every 3 years, and there are explicit mechanisms in the legislation to say if the contribution rate falls below what's needed, here's how it would be adjusted. I haven't been able in the last 24 hours to think about what the analogy would be for Lansdowne, but some sort of similar kind of thinking seems to me definitely warranted.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Wolfson. I'll see if staff has an opinion on those positions, but thank you very much for your delegation.
Thank you. Councillor Hill has a question for you as well.
Thank you very much for the delegation. I heard you speak to the concept of like a Lansdowne 2.5, or, your preference to have perhaps the presentation to us now that looks at either a modified Lansdowne 2.0 that addresses some opportunities or perhaps mitigates against some of the concerns that you have. Is that kind of a fair representation of part of your concern, is that perhaps some of the modifications or options that you would like to see with this are simply not being presented?
That's correct. Yes. And as far as Lansdowne 2.5, maybe if I can, extemporize, a Lansdowne 2.1, for example, might say, look, there's been a lot of concern about the disability access to the north side stands. And I heard something about, well, we can't put another elevator because we'd have to drill a hole in the concrete and that might not work. But I'm a little skeptical that, with a little creative or out of the box thinking, a Lansdowne 2.1 might actually say, well, we can do better on the accessibility and things like that. A Lansdowne 2.5, I guess it was really disappointing, more than 10 years ago that what the idea of having an international design competition was scotched. But, if I had my druthers, I think it would be wonderful to have a more creative opportunity with competing visions, actually open it up to say, what are the possibilities here?
Well, thank you. I appreciate your delegation, and I will be following up to see if there are mechanisms that we could have or could still modify or adapt this plan to make it better. So thank you very much.
Thank you, and thank you for your delegation. Our next delegation is Isla Patterson. I'm not sure if it's online or in person. Maybe neither. We don't see anyone online. No? All right, well, we will move to Sharon Katz. Whenever you're ready.
Good morning. My name is Sharon Katz, and I would like to thank the Auditor General for raising some of the issues that I think we should be concerned about. I would like to focus on 3 topics arising out of the Auditor General's report. 1, opportunity costs. 2, long-term financial risk. And 3, the staff's decision to disregard the clear motion from Council on how to deal with the allocation of a portion of the air rights revenue to affordable housing. I'll start with the last one first. As the Auditor General gently expresses it on pages 8 and 9, quote, the approach taken by the city to internally reallocate a portion of the proceeds of the sale of the air rights has reduced this contribution by $5 million, which may not align with Council's expectations, end quote. I want to know what was going on. Why did the staff decide they could disregard and overrule the clear decision of Council? Next is opportunity costs. Basically, this means that every dollar that is spent on the Lansdowne 2.0 project is a dollar that the city is not spending on other city priorities or activities. On page 8, the report notes that the city is allocating an annual amount from the budget specifically to repay the debt associated with Lansdowne 2.0, representing an opportunity cost, as this could be used for other city priorities. On page 20, the report references funding from reserves, $13.8 million from citywide capital reserves, which could otherwise have been directed towards other capital projects or municipal needs, and $1.8 million from stormwater reserves that could otherwise have been used for other stormwater management initiatives or infrastructure improvements. On page 25, the report references the increase in the municipal accommodation tax, which could have been allocated to other tourism-related projects and priorities. On the same page, the report references the $82.7 million of city investment, $4.3 million per year, that could otherwise be used to advance other municipal services or priorities. The issue of opportunity costs is particularly significant at this time, because in a few weeks from now, we will be considering the city budget. Based on previous experience, we can expect to hear that the city doesn't have enough money to properly fund transit or affordable housing, or the money required to deal with maintenance of existing city infrastructure, or a bunch of other things that residents want. Councillors who vote to support the current Lansdowne 2.0 proposal will be telling Ottawa residents and taxpayers that this project is more important than any and all of the other possibilities that the city will be refusing to spend adequate money on. Other possibilities affecting residents in every ward in the city. Finally, I would like to quote one summary comment from the report about risk. Quote, given the expected duration, size, and interdependencies associated with the Lansdowne 2.0 construction project and the current level of economic uncertainty, there is a risk that the city's contingency of 10% for the project may not be sufficient to cover all unforeseen costs. If this risk was to materialize, it could require the city to take on additional debt. The mayor has said that the city is in a financial crisis, and the Auditor General's report has confirmed what we already know, that these are uncertain times. And I suggest to you that this is not the time to be committing this kind of money to this kind of project. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions for the delegate?
Chair, just
Mr. Menard?
just a quick question. Thank you. Thank you so much. Sharon, you care a lot about this issue and you've been engaged on it throughout this process. I guess what is the most concerning risk to you that the Auditor General has highlighted or that has been in the public domain? What are you most concerned about as an Ottawa resident, given the project cost and the other priorities the city has?
Basically, for the amount of money that this project is going to cost taxpayers, that's going to not be available for everything else that the city has to do. I don't think it's appropriate. Somebody told me the other day that the football stadium gets used 12 days a year. Like, should we be spending hundreds of million or whatever number of millions of dollars to change it and not necessarily to make it better because it won't have a roof? The thing about the arena not being accessible, I think that's an issue. But then I learned the other day that there are all kinds of facilities in Ottawa that aren't accessible and should be upgraded, but there's no money for that. And like the other day, finding out about how the city has treated the Professional Women's Hockey League, I found that shocking, infuriating. Like, you raised the issue of the arena not being big enough for the crowds that the women's hockey team was getting, I don't know, 2 years ago, and I've raised it a number of times with city staff. I wrote to Sean Moore an email, and he wrote back and said, it's okay, there'll be standing room. Like, we're going to spend how many millions of dollars so that we can have standing room? And ever since then, they've stopped saying standing room. They've just said, oh, it'll be okay. And then the Women's Hockey League finally, came out, and I was wondering, like, how come they waited so long? Well, then I heard the delegation, and they were told, just be quiet and be supportive, and everything will be okay. Well, everything is not okay. And I think that this is not an appropriate project. They're not going to be having an arena that can accommodate the charge, and they're planning. Part of apparently what they're planning is there'll be fewer seats, but some of them will be like suites and box seats, whatever. So they'll be more expensive. So there'll be fewer, they'll be more expensive, and like that's not good for the fans. And I think that they were betrayed by city staff or whoever, and the OSEG or whoever was in charge of coming up with the final proposal. I find that really infuriating.
Yeah, that was truly an embarrassing moment for our city when that occurred at Finance Committee. I appreciate your delegation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. A couple more questions, Sharon.
Oh,
Yeah, Councillor Hill?
Thank you very much for the delegation. I recognize your concerns with regard to the impacts on a potential Lansdowne 2.0 as it pertains to the PWHL. Would you equally have a comment or position with regards to the current, health and safety concerns that at least one of the players raised about the conditions in their change room where there's a lack of ventilation and their concerns about the actual operations that they have to go through day in and day out in the current Lansdowne configuration if that was to remain the way that they were going to be playing for the next 5-10 years?
The first thing that I want to say is that OSEG has been responsible for the maintenance of that arena. And like I find it perplexing that we would be having OSEG take over maintenance of the new arena when they've done such a lousy job on the old arena. Like, there are things that I'm sure that there are things that could have been done to make the situation not as bad as it is. And basically, I guess what I would say is that this particular version of the future, Lansdowne 2.0, is not the solution. That it may be that there should be an arena built, but it should be big enough for the charge and for the charge going forward, because one would expect that with a growing population and with the popularity that they've had, they would have increasing audiences. And it may be that something should be built in conjunction with what's happening at Le Breton Flats. But this particular version of the future is not the solution. So to say that, what's there now is bad, so this is the only solution, is, to me, makes no sense. That we have to find another alternative. We should go back to the drawing board.
And just a reminder to councilors and committee members, can we try to keep this to the audit? This is Audit Committee, and we're dealing with a follow-up audit as not debating Lansdowne as a whole.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So would you be supportive then if there was a motion that looked at an $80 million to $100 million addition to the Lansdowne 2.0 program in order to accommodate the identified requirement for additional seats?
I am not sure that that is the ideal solution to the problem. So like what this whole thing has tried to be is, there is only one solution, and now, if you want more seats, it's going to cost, $100 million. It may be that we should have another arena somewhere else where it doesn't destroy green space and cut down trees in what was built to be a park.
And my last question, you spoke to the concerns about the financial arrangements with the moving forward with Lansdowne 2.0. Would you have any comment to the Ottawa Board of Trade, who have indicated that this project will grow hundreds of jobs and likely bring forth about $500 million in additional economic activity for the city of Ottawa?
I believe that that's not the only way to do it, and I think the negatives outweigh the positives.
Thank you very much.
Councillor Devine.
Thank you, Chair. Sharon, you made reference earlier in your delegation to the opportunity costs of using a significant amount of reserves on this project. And you reminded for me that this project is allocating 1.8 million from our stormwater reserve for this project. In my ward alone and across the city over the past summer, there have been a number of water main breaks. The AG's report makes reference to these stormwater reserves could have been used for other stormwater management initiatives or infrastructure improvements. In your opinion, if I polled for citywide opinion of where they would rather see $1.8 million of stormwater reserves go, do you think they would rather they go towards Lansdowne or towards maintenance of our water mains?
I don't have the expertise to decide what the stormwater reserves should be used for. But I think it was very, for me, enlightening to read the Auditor General's report, where she listed these various pots of money that are being allocated exclusively to Lansdowne 2.0 that could be going to all kinds of other things. And as I said, the budget is coming up, and what I've seen the last couple of years in terms of, the budget is, well, we can't fund specifically reasonable transit because we don't have enough money. But, we can spend this kind of money on what may be a fairly frivolous kind of endeavor.
And following that, the AG report also identifies that 13.8 million from our citywide reserves are being allocated towards Lansdowne. In your opinion, if, as the AG says, those reserves could have been directed towards other capital projects or municipal needs, is it your opinion that those 13.8 million in reserves could perhaps serve a greater need in other areas than Lansdowne?
All I know is that every time there's a budget, there's always this, we don't have enough money. And to me, the answer to we don't have enough money might be, well, maybe we should, put a hold on Lansdowne and spend the money on the various things. Like at the delegations the other day, somebody mentioned that like community centers and Nepean Sportsplex and various other community things, can use upgrading and improvements, but city says we don't have the money. Well, maybe that would be a better investment of the money than spending it all on Lansdowne 2.0, which part of what it's going to do is for 10 years, there's going to be, this massive construction, which is going to be chasing people away.
Thank you, Sharon. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Plante.
Yes, my thing works. Hi. Okay. And if you'll just indulge me for a second, Chair, because I just wanted to make a quick correction to a comment that was made. You can cut me off, obviously, if this is not appropriate, but I just wanted to say I do believe there was a comment about spending on our other facilities, and my understanding is there is an asset management plan coming up to look at how we will be, like the timeline for renovating other facilities in the city. So I just wanted to point that out because we're not neglecting or putting our other facilities aside. I have a lot of aging facilities as well. They're coming up for their own upgrade, facelift, whatever you want to call it. And I wanted to thank her for her comments because they are important. It is important to keep our facilities in good shape, but it is coming up. There will be a plan coming up looking at in order how we tackle that. So I just wanted to make that clarification, Chair, and I apologize if that was out of order.
Thank you, Conseiller, for that clarification. Thank you.
Well, can I respond to that? Because the timeline that may be included in that report is likely to be, more drawn out than it could be if money was made available sooner.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right. So we actually have Isla Patterson online. So we'll go back to Isla. Isla, can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you. Thank you very much.
All
Thank
righty.
you.
Whenever you're ready, we'll start the clock.
Okay, you can start it now. Thank you very much. I'd like to thank the committee for this opportunity to comment on the report. And I will say that many of the other delegations have handled my main points. So I will just select the ones that I don't think have been mentioned. I would like to remind everyone that the reason that we have a construction contingency estimate is that there has been a major change in the Lansdowne partnership. And this is in Lansdowne 1.0. All the costs overrun were handled by OSEG, and now it is all of the cost overruns will fall to the responsibility of the city. And I'm not sure, it's not a part of this audit, but I would just ask councillors to find out what benefit the city got from that change in the partnership. I would also like to remind councillors that everyone that has spoken here has pointed to the contingency being a minimum. And no one has said that it's adequate. And the Auditor General said that it was chosen because it met the city's estimation guide, but not necessarily that it accurately reflected the unforeseen costs. So my concern is the project going forward for approval without having a revised contingency, which people have said might be up to 25%. The second thing, so I would just like to say that we can't just move forward with a 10% contingency that exists. That to me would be irresponsible. The second thing that I would like to point out is about the retail and the risks to the retail, because the retail revenue is supposed to be one of the very critical elements, the critical component of the cash flow. And yes, we have existing retail in Lansdowne, but while the construction is on, I doubt that there will be as many shoppers or people attending retail to have an economic benefit there during the construction. And the critical component of the new retail is a Class D estimate, which is a 40% unknown or contingency, and it may not even happen if Mirabella, the developer, decides to pull out because, as Carolyn, as was mentioned, the air rights seem questionable. So given that the retail is so critical for revenues, I think that has to be looked at again. And then I would like to point out again the auditor's concern about the main risk being the duration of the project and how reasonable can be these assumptions going forward. And I would like to remind every councillors that the AG's recommendation number 3 was to update the financial results, and we've had this in the past. And the Lansdowne has lost money, and there's no way that the city can intervene to improve that. So yes, the Auditor General's recommendations can be followed, but to what effect? Because there's no off-ramp for the city. And the other thing is my concern that the new event center will cost $176.8 million. And in the projected cash flows, there's going to be a loss from this center. So why are we even considering building it? So anyway, thank you very much.
Thank you. Any questions for the delegate? Seeing none, thank you very much. We'll go to Noel Lomer. Mr. Lomer, can you hear us?
Good morning, councillors.
Oh, great. You can start whenever you're ready. We'll start the clock.
Thank you. I'm a resident of the Civic Hospital area and a retired investment advisor. The Lansdowne project has high risks, both due to the economy facing Ottawa and due to the project's financial risks, which could terminate the project. In the recent past, Canada had low interest rates and a positive economic environment. Today, the city is facing economic risks of slow growth and inflation. Prime Minister Mark Carney said recently that Canadians need to be prepared for sacrifices. Here are some economic numbers that you should not ignore. Canadian real GDP declined 1.6% on an annual basis in the first quarter of this year. U.S. inflation is now overall 3%. Canada's economy is heavily influenced by our southern neighbor and has similar risks. It's not yet a recession, but it's approaching a stagflationary economy. The federal government is reducing spending by 15% over the next 3 years. The federal public service could lose 24,000 full-time jobs in the National Capital Region by 2028. Unemployment rate forecast for Ontario in 2026 is 7.3%. The real estate market is slowing dramatically. Toronto's market for new condos has fallen, with condo sales down 77%. Ottawa seems less volatile, but we face similar market forces: cost overruns, worsening market conditions, inflation, oversupply, and so on. Now is not the time to commit a minimum of $500 million on a sports and entertainment complex. It's time to be prudent, not adventurous. As well, there are serious financial risks in the new Lansdowne 2.0 proposal. Total cost of major infrastructure projects always grows. Our mayor has told us to expect that. The LRT costs have been much greater than planned, and the new library, as an example, is 73% over budget. The stadium and arena contract is not a fixed price contract when taxpayers are on the hook for cost overruns. Revenue sources are very high risk. Tickets, property tax uplift, waterfall distribution, retail profits are all unpredictable. It's impossible to reliably predict revenue streams over 50 years until 2075. The anchor tenant for the stadium is the Red Blacks, but 7 of 9 CFL franchises are losing money. It's important to note that OSG is committed to keep the Red Blacks and 67s at Lansdowne only until 2042, that's 33 years before the end of the financial plan to which they're expected to contribute. The city overpredicts revenue growth and underpredicts costs. It forecasts Red Blacks revenue to grow at 9.8%, which is double the actual, and it forecasts costs to grow 2% when costs have been higher. The most serious financial risk is the air rights deal. The developer, Mirabella Development Corporation, has not bought the air rights. There is no $65 million. It will pay a deposit as an option to build the 2 towers. The city won't receive the $65 million it'll receive $1 million in 2025, potentially $4.7 million in 2030. The developer has a choice to exercise the option and walk away. What is the plan if the $65 million sale does not materialize? If Mirabella abandons its deposit and the deal by 2030, there will be no $65 million for air rights or to pay the interest on the $331 million of debt from the deal. There will also be no income from 75% of taxes from the 2 towers. This whole unsecured air rights deal could fall through. I ask you not to vote for this high-risk project. If it doesn't work, your vote will be remembered in 2026. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions for the delegate? Seeing none, thank you very much. All right, we'll move to questions to the auditor. Councillor Carr.
Thank you very much. Thank you to the Auditor General. Always appreciate audits, and I love project management. So first question, did the timeline prevent you, the timeline with all the documentation prevent you from fulfilling what you would have wanted to fulfill in this audit?
Chair, what I would say is we had committed to, at a minimum, coming back and reporting on the actions that management had taken as a result of our Sprint 1 audit. We were able to do that, just barely. I'll be very candid with that. At no fault of staff. They did everything they could to help us get there, but obviously there's minimum due diligence that we have to do in order to issue a report. So we made that timeline. Were there other things that we would have liked to have looked at? Yes, candidly. That being said, it doesn't preclude us from doing so at a later date.
So would there have been a different outcome on the recommendations in this audit if you'd had more time?
Had we had a larger scope and had additional findings, yes, that could have been the case.
So different in scope. Just with respect to opportunity cost, which is mentioned, I appreciated the clarification on the 15.6 million. I noted later in the audit, it also mentioned that if we don't proceed, then the $22 million spent to date that could be funded by the project would now have to be funded from capital reserves. And to me, that suggests that there would be a net impact of decreasing the funds available for other projects by 6.4 million. Would you agree with that?
Thank you for the question. I just want to make sure I clarify. I think what our report said is that if we did want to recognize information provided by staff that indicated that should the project not go forward, there is already $22 million already spent on this project, and that is a sunk cost.
It would now, but my understanding from the report is if that $22 million would now have to be funded from capital reserves.
Thank you for the question. As per information provided by staff, that's where it would be funded from. So as per information provided by staff, that is where it would be funded from.
Yes.
Okay.
Staff has indicated that that is where those funds would be drawn from.
Okay, so if there was $15.6 million as an opportunity cost, but then 22 million if we didn't go ahead, that would balance out to minus 6.4 million, wouldn't it?
Thank you for the question. I think it's comparing a little bit of different apples to oranges, but if right now, and again, we didn't do a full analysis of any other thing except this project, but we did want to recognize that 22 million has been spent. What we were pointing out with the 15.6 is that if this project was to go forward, there are plans to fund the construction cost, but with $15.6 million of reserves, mostly from citywide capital reserves and a small part from the stormwater.
Okay, thanks. Thank you. Appreciate that. So usually when we evaluate opportunity costs, we have to, the costs and benefits of every option available must be considered and weighted against the other. Were other options considered and weighted here?
So first and foremost, members, I'd like to reiterate that this was a follow-up audit. So we had a scope for our audit that we presented last year. We followed up on that. So that's the extent of our scope. But to be very candid, if we wanted to look at all the options, they were not all costed and there are not full analyses done by staff on all of those options. So we would not have been in a position to actually audit them.
Okay, thank you. I noticed that the municipal accommodation tax was mentioned as a potential opportunity cost. My understanding was that was negotiated with Ottawa Tourism exclusively for the Lansdowne project. Was there any verification with Ottawa Tourism that they would consider that those funds would be available if Lansdowne were not to go ahead?
Chair, our understanding through discussions with staff is that their partners are in favor of the increased percentages. And it is also our understanding that generally speaking in the past, those funds have been redirected to other tourism related activities. However, it is also our understanding that it is the city's decision as to what to do with those particular funds.
Okay, thank you. On the construction contingency, when you stated that 10% was low, how did you evaluate the complexity and risk of the project in determining that?
I'll start off, but then I'll also look to our consultants from BDO to add to that. First and foremost, we look at general projects. Every project comes with risks. You establish requirements. You hope that you have done your best from a due diligence perspective. So we went through a few various factors, taking out of account the economic uncertainty that we are currently faced with. If we were not to look at the aspect of tariffs, there are already risks associated when you start looking at projects of this size and magnitude. There are ramifications, as we mentioned, whether it be penalties or impacts on revenues, if there are shifts in timelines. It's not uncommon. It is actually quite common with many projects for there to be shifts in timelines, for there to be clarification issues with regards to design elements between, your proponent that's been selected to do the work. So these various elements are basic items that we take into consideration for any type of project. 10% is standard, it's industry practice. You then add the length of this project. That brings additional uncertainties. The level of interdependencies that come into play with the fact of, that you need. the city's in a position where they need to ensure construction is done by 2028, with regards to the event center, and then moving on to North Side Stands, in order to ensure that there are particular milestones linked to Mirabella that are obviously reached. So those are just varying factors that we looked at from that perspective. Add to that the economic uncertainty that we are in, and that's where that 10% really gets called into question. You know what, I'm going to answer this question because I know I'm going to get asked it at some point. We've not quantified what that should be. We're missing information in order to be able to do that. We don't know EBC's cost breakdown. That's one thing. We don't know how much is in labor, how much is in specific materials that could be impacted by tariffs. We would need more information. So that's kind of a bare minimum. The other thing is I don't have a crystal ball. I can't tell you if next year CUSMA is not going to be renegotiated and we could be facing 100% tariffs. So if I tell you 15%, 20% is a better contingency, I might still be way too low. So.
Okay, thanks very much. And I noticed the comparison to the BMO field expansion. That had a completely different project model. It was a direct owner managed procurement model. And we are using a design build model. Was any of those comparisons done between the different risks of the different model? Like, it's always been my experience that a direct owner managed procurement is a model that has less predictable initial costs. And I think we saw that with the field model, with the baseball field model. Was there any look at that?
So it was one particular example that we brought in as to how projects of this type of nature, how costs can unfortunately go off the rails. That is just an example, hence why we are not saying it should be 25% contingency. That is an inference that some people are making. That is not what we are stating. There are other similar projects that are currently ongoing. Unfortunately, we can't bring those into play because there's no final costs. And in all honesty, most municipalities don't report on overages or inappropriate contingency amounts until the project is finalized. So we can't bring those particular elements into play. That being said, we also leverage the expertise from our consultants as to what types of overages we're seeing just generally in North America. And I look to Melissa or Satish if you'd like to add to that.
Thank you.
Sorry, Councillor Carr. I think our experts may want to add in.
I was just going to see if Satish, our construction expert, wanted to comment on some trends we're seeing across North America.
Yeah, sure. Good morning, everyone. Myself, Satish. I think Auditor General has covered all the key points, but to talk about the construction projects across North America, according to the survey, approximately 57% of the construction projects has seen an increase in the construction duration by an average of 45%. And when it comes to the cost, almost 37% of the project has seen nearly about 30% increase in comparison to the overall budget. So that is the comparison we have made in order to make this comment and compare that with the 10% contingency the city has allocated. So that explains the challenges that the construction industry is now currently going through. So that explains the statement that made in the report as well, whether the 10% allocation of the contingency is adequate. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Was there any look taken at the difference between a project and a contingency, whether or not it's a new build or a rebuild? And for example, the baseball field was a rebuild as opposed to our project is a new build. And usually in real property projects, you'll notice a difference between contingency on those two. And I wondered if that was looked at all.
Chair, and I'll just go back to the fact that this was a follow-up. We conducted follow-up procedures. So obviously we do not go into the exact same detailed analysis as we would have in our original audit.
Okay, thanks. I'll just take the parliamentary center block, for example. The part that's being refurbished is at 20% contingency. The new piece, the visitor center, is at 10. So I just hadn't seen that before. I appreciate that. Just in terms of the interdependency schedules, it's a fairly linear path, one piece followed by another piece followed by another piece, and I noticed, it's assessed at a risk. Was there any look before assessing that as a risk at how those interdependencies were managed, were going to be managed?
Thank you for the question, and I will look to BDO if they want to add. But I mean, we did obviously consider that it is linear, and obviously when there is that path, there's, one has to be finished in order. Obviously, there's some synergies, but others have to happen. But we certainly did look at again, follow-up level, not audit level, at the timelines and the interdependencies that were resulting from that.
Okay, thank you very much. And you analyzed the risk register for the project as well as part of, you received that information from staff and took that into account when analyzing the complexity and all that?
Thank you for the question. We wouldn't have necessarily gone down to that level of, again, detail in terms of analyzing the project management associated with the project to date.
Okay, thank you very much for your questions. I really appreciate all the work that you did in such a short timeline too. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Carr. Councillor Hill.
Thank you, Madam Chair. In your report, you rightly point out that there's risk in proceeding with this major construction project, and there's no decision that we make around this table. It doesn't involve risk. We have to balance risk to proceeding with the costs of doing nothing, with the costs of proceeding with some modifications. And without a doubt, there's a residual risk regardless. So the question becomes, where's the balance of residual risk and which decision will expose the city to the least downside and ideally the most upside? With that in mind, would it be fair to say that any major project that the city executes at this scale will have some fair amounts of risk involved, particularly when it comes to the long-term projections?
Chair, yes, that's a very fair statement.
When the city builds something like a new community center, does that come with quantifiable risk to the taxpayer as well?
It does, but I would say not to this extent.
What about when the city invests in new technology? For example, like our new electric bus fleet, does that come with a quantifiable risk to the taxpayer?
Chair, yes, absolutely.
So I wanted to reinforce Councillor Carr's comments about the risk of opportunity costs that you outline in several sections of your report. One section stood out to me where you noted that if Lansdowne proceeds, $15.6 million of the project will be funded through capital reserves. But if council rejects Lansdowne, $22 million will be spent from those same reserves, money that could be spent on other projects. Is it fair to say that there are opportunity costs to both proceeding and not proceeding with Lansdowne 2.0?
Chair, what I could speak to is we are obviously aware of the 22 million in sunk cost, and yes, that would be an opportunity cost of not proceeding. Every decision council makes is an opportunity cost. They're foregoing another option.
When you speak to the minimum buffer in the contingency fund, what would it mean practically if the project costs, in fact, were to exceed the contingency buffer? So in this case, a 10%, but we ended up, in fact, going over. What would that mean practically to the city?
Chair, I would have to redirect that question to staff because they would have to explain how they would want to fund any overages.
From your perspective, would it be fair to say that a contingency overage for which the buffer was not adequate in comparison to expenditures which were within the contingency, they would both be funded by the tax base? At the end of the day, the city's going to pay the bill, whether we have a high enough buffer in our contingency or not.
Chair, I would say yes, that's an accurate statement. And I think I just want to maybe put a little bit of context. I think what we're trying to raise is obviously that there's a risk, and I do think there's a more significant risk of it actually materializing. And, our report is meant to help council make an informed decision. We want to ensure that council understands that this project has a significant likelihood of being higher in costs, and we want taxpayers to understand that as well. And then it's up to members of council to determine, is that something that they're comfortable with? That's truly what our entire report is meant to be doing, is to communicate the risks and for council to look at the city's risk appetite. And, is that risk reward that you're seeing from the project, does that fall within the appetite? If it does, then you have the support for your decision to move forward. If you feel it doesn't, then it's the flip side. I guess I'm trying to say it's as simple as that. As we say, we are not stating any way or another, but there are risks, there are opportunity costs. And at the end of the day, if councillors are comfortable with the price tag, that's it.
But it is outside of your scope to speak to the downside risk to not proceeding with Lansdowne 2.0.
Chair, I would not say it's outside of our scope. It just was not included in the original scope of our audit, and as such was not the scope of our follow-up procedures. So I cannot comment on them since we did not do work. As Auditor General, I can only speak and provide you my professional opinion based off of the work that we have conducted, not what we think could or potentially could materialize based off of us happening to know other information.
We heard a significant concern from one of the delegates speaking about the retail estimates. Can you confirm your estimate or your assessment of the risk regarding the retail revenue analysis, please?
Thank you for the question again, not to say it too many times, but based on our follow-up procedures and not audit level assessment, we did look at the assumptions that that were underlying of the financial projections associated with the retail, and because this was done primarily by a third party EY, it was deemed as reasonable. The assumptions were reasonable.
So your assessment on the retail risk is that it is reasonable.
The assumptions underlying the projections, yes.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the work done, and I do just want to highlight that the risk identification here was within scope of your audit, focused on progressing with Lansdowne 2.0, which is, from my perception, a large reason why we're seeing a lot of content here on the risks of proceeding with Lansdowne 2.0, understanding that looking at the risk of not proceeding was not part of that scope. So those are questions that I'll follow up with management.
Perfect. Chair, if I just might add to that, 100%. You will see even our recommendations are with the presumption that this proceeds, and that's because our work is based off of the staff report, and the staff report has a recommendation to proceed. So it's again another point why I want to highlight, yes, our risks are with regards to the current option in front of you, and that is because that is the decision before you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Madam Chair.
And thank you for all those clarifications, Auditor General. Okay, Councillor Kavanaugh.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you to the Auditor General and her whole team, of course, on this report, particularly with the timelines that you've had to do it in, and obviously the interest that's here. It's a very important report and appreciate it. On page 2021 of the report outlines how the city plans to use 15.6 million from the city's reserves to fund construction of Lansdowne 2.0, and 13.8 coming from citywide capital reserve and 1.8 coming from the city storm water reserves. The quote is, while this allocation does reduce the amount of debt the city will require, taking it from reserves, it represents the opportunity cost to the city, as this funding could have been used to meet other municipal needs. I just want to ask, when you say other municipal needs, this is basically could have been used for other recreation buildings or storm sewer projects, so that it would not be used for those. Is that right?
Chair, that would be correct. Obviously, each reserve bucket has its parameters as to what it can and can't be used for, but yes, that is correct.
Yeah. So, so that means the other city priorities that we have, which we have so many. So appreciate that. And you raised some concerns about the optimistic estimates for construction costs as well as the revenue streams, particularly in respect to the Ottawa Red Blacks franchise. And on page 11, the report describes the current 10% contingency allowance for unexpected events, risks, or changes during the project lifestyle as representing the minimum buffer for a project of this magnitude or duration. In your view, would that be a more realistic or conservative contingency allowance be it for a project like this?
Sorry, my apologies. Did you provide a figure that you were hoping for us to comment on?
Yeah, the minimum buffer for the project is you described as 10% contingency. Is that realistic, or is that too conservative a contingency allowance for this project?
Chair or Vice Chair, I think what we are trying to say is we are warning that we do think it is a very minimum buffer. If any of the risks that we've mentioned are materialized, especially if many of them materialize, that compounding effect will likely go over that 10% contingency.
Yeah, and the other factors that we all know about are tariffs and trade relations, which obviously have a huge effect and will have, and are you saying that they have not been adequately taken into consideration for the next few years?
Thank you for the question. I'd say again, and maybe this is a question I'd refer to management, but from the work that we've done, we obviously recognize that the 10% contingency is per the estimate guide. We've just flagged that due to different risks associated with this project, it could be low. We do acknowledge in our report that, on the topic of tariffs as an example, because we have flagged that as a risk, there are tariff management plans that the city has putting in place. So there are mitigations. We just wanted to flag the risks.
Back to the 10% contingency allowance, what would be a more realistic buffer?
Chair, as I'd mentioned, I think it would be very difficult for us to give you a specific amount, especially as, again, sounding like a broken record between myself and Joanne here, is that we conducted follow-up procedures. So the level of detail that we would have had to have done to come up with an appropriate percentage would have been extensive, and we are missing information in order to get there. And there are uncertainties. So.
Understood. I mean, you had limited time but you could see that the 10% was obviously not adequate. Okay, thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Councillor Bradley.
Thanks so much, Chair, and thank you to the AG and to your entire team for this audit. Lansdowne 2.0 is about financial sustainability of the partnership, and in particular for OSEG. And in order to achieve that, the city has had to assume greater risk in this version of the plan. And so we're talking a lot about risk and how it's mitigated. And I want to better understand how that risk is shared between the city, the taxpayer, and OSEG as part of this plan. And I want to thank you, because what we've learned through the staff report and very clearly through your report is that the financial risk is 100% mitigated, because the entire plan is underwritten by the taxpayer to the tune of 17.4 million a year from 2036 to 2070. So the real risk is that without those revenues, the business case for this project weakens, because the city won't receive funding to reduce the taxpayer's direct contribution. So the business case for Lansdowne 2.0, as we all know, is what actually is being sold and suggested, that this is a great deal for taxpayers, that it's only going to cost $4.3 million a year because the business case is so solid. So for me, the real risk is that the deal becomes less great for taxpayers if the revenues are not realized, and that you pointed out that there's a lot of risk to revenue. And then, of course, if there are cost overruns, again, those are direct costs to the taxpayer, which then again weakens the business case. But I also want to understand the risk of unrealized revenues as it affects the partnership and the pro rata share of our equity. Am I able to ask questions to Ms. Jasmine, Chair, to understand that?
You're asking questions right now of the Office of the Auditor General.
Okay, but I can't ask maybe the Auditor General knows this, but I just want to understand the risk of unrealized revenue on the impact of the pro rata share of our equity.
Right, but right now you're asking questions of the Office of the Auditor General. If you want to ask questions for staff, we do that next.
Okay, sorry, I didn't understand how that worked. Okay, so anyway, would you agree that my assessment of the risk there is to the business case, as taxpayers are contributing the full freight to service the debt?
Chair, I would say that our report summarizes the city's suggested approach to fund the project is based off of the budget sort of reserve that they are establishing that totals, as Joanne mentioned, the face value or nominal value of 694 million, or the net present value calculation of 331 million. And obviously we've raised concerns with regards to the likelihood of the waterfall distributions occurring as stated within the staff report. So I would say kind of that gap is your risk, is whether or not they would all materialize.
And if the revenues do not materialize, as you've indicated, some may or may not materialize to the full extent of which have been estimated by the staff report, then is the taxpayer paying the difference?
Yes, absolutely. As of right now, the funding model is to have the taxpayer pay for the cost of the project, and any additional revenues that occur as a result of the partnership that the city receives through the waterfall distributions would offset that cost to the taxpayer.
Thank you. With respect to cost overruns, I recall Roger Greenberg at committee was reminiscing about some of the pitfalls of Lansdowne 1.0 and that deal for OSEG. Specifically, he had commented that it was maybe foolish for OSEG to agree to take on the cost overruns of the construction because the majority of the cost overruns that were experienced in Lansdowne 1.0 were a result of city-caused delays. And I was looking at the contract with EBC and the 6 sort of pillars of which would be considered to be city-caused delays, so design changes, scope changes, all of those things is what the city's covering. So when you were doing this audit or this follow-up audit, did you look at some of the cost overruns and the types of cost overruns that were experienced in Lansdowne 1.0 to help highlight where the potential risks were and to this?
Thank you for the question. We wouldn't have been able to do that. First of all, I don't know if that information is actually available to us. But that wouldn't have been something we were really focused on this proposal.
Yeah, I think it's really important just to highlight that again, in Lansdowne 1.0, the majority of the cost overruns were related to city-caused delays, and that in this version, city-caused delays will be a cost overrun that the city would bear. So it's probably likely that those will materialize as you've suggested in your report. With respect to tariffs, I had raised this question during my briefing with staff and specifically asked how the city had structured this contract to insulate us from tariffs, as we know we're in a very tumultuous political climate. And the answer I had gotten during that briefing was that it depends. That of course, that if there are material changes to tariffs that are affecting the materials used in this project, that the contractor would be required to seek out another supplier as a sort of a first course of action to mitigate that impact. But in the event that they couldn't, that again, it would depend whether or not we would bear that change in cost depending on the material. Now, that is as far as we got in the briefing, but is your understanding that there is a difference of how tariffs would be handled and who would bear the responsibility based on material type?
Well, Chair, I'll give a high-level answer and then perhaps maybe Joanne can add. And I'd also, when it comes time to staff questions, they may be able to give you a little bit more color. So our understanding is that in order to ensure that the bid didn't come in from a resulting kind of overpayment by the city, because let's say nothing more happens with tariffs, the city doesn't want to have this buffer, included within the bid price that the city's now on the hook to pay. So obviously they had discussions with their proponents in order to ensure that the prices that were received were reflecting current market prices, and that's what the city would be paying. There is obviously a mechanism within the contract that allows the proponent, being EBC, to come back should tariffs increase and they not be able to manage that particular increased cost and submit a claim. They have to support that claim based off of what would have been their original cost and how, and demonstrate that back to the city that there is a direct link, and that goes through that particular process. And I look to my team to see if there's anything they'd like to add to that.
Maybe just that we do understand from staff that part of that mechanism would be to work with the contractor to figure out mitigations, as you mentioned.
And are there any best practices that your team was able to discover in this process that other municipalities or government contracts are putting in place with respect to tariffs to insulate the taxpayer that you could, if you had more time, maybe would have recommended?
I'd invite our construction expert, Satish, to discuss any other trends we're seeing across other municipalities or contracts with regards to tariff.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I can take an example of how this mechanism works. Let's say, for example, an additional 10% tariff was imposed on imported material or on equipment 6 months after the bid was closed. So the main contractor will notify the city that the material or equipment sourced from overseas will now cost additional $1 million, as an example, due to the new tariff that is now imposed. Then the next step is he submits an evidence that the Canadian source material or the equipment have a marginally higher cost, but a longer lead time. So making it the substitution unfeasible when you compare the cost implication versus the time implication. Then he submits a claim seeking an adjustment to the contractual price adjustment, including additional supporting documentations. The city will review it upon verification, and if they agree that there are no other remedies available, then they will have to approve the change order that increases the contract price by another $1 million. And also, if there are associated delays with it, then that amount will increase. So that's how the future tariffs will have an impact on the contract price. But again, the sourcing plan will be key. How this can be mitigated is the sourcing plan will identify all the materials and the equipments that are planned to be sourced overseas, and the Canadian initiatives, like we will have to manage within that sourcing plan. We will have to identify what is that we can source locally. That is the mitigative measures that the other municipalities or the other project owners are coming up with. So trying to maintain or minimize the reliance on overseas material or equipments. So in this case, sourcing plan will be the key for us to make a comment on that.
Okay, so to understand that if the contractor identifies a material that has been impacted by tariffs, they could source out another supplier. But if that supplier couldn't deliver the material in a timeline that makes sense, and the contractor would make an application to the city essentially to say you either get the time extension or the material cost increase, the city then has to approve that as a change order, and the city then that would be a city cost. Is that?
That's right.
That is our general understanding, but
Okay.
I would refer you to also to staff. They may want to add. to
Yeah,
that.
I'll have some questions there too. It's just, to me, one of the red blocks that you had in your report was a city caused delay in approving change orders, and that just sounds very complicated. And that would obviously be a change order, and I could imagine there would be a lot of analysis that would go in terms of what do we accept, the time difference or the cost difference, which could then cause a delay, which then again could create cost overruns. So I'll leave my questions there because I have more to staff. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Kitts.
Thank you, Chair. Already some good questions asked. I just have one additional one. To follow up on a question Councillor Bradley posed, the report highlights concerns about delays that could occur between the coordination of the construction of the event center, the stands, and Mirabella's residential project. Is there a specific weakness in the city's oversight function that led to this conclusion? And if so, do you have a recommendation to strengthen it?
Chair, I'll start off, and Joanne may want to add to that. I would say what we are highlighting is just a general inherent risk. You have that interdependency. You're talking about a few years worth of a time lag. Delays occur. So we are highlighting that as a particular risk. Joanne, anything else to add? No.
So general risk with all construction projects, nothing specific to this. Okay, great. Thank you.
Councillor Menard.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you for your report, the follow-up sprint. You've identified both capital and operating opportunity costs for the city. Can you just, with finality, confirm that these funds that you've identified could be spent elsewhere?
Chair, as we've identified in our report, we are highlighting that these are opportunity costs, as with every decision council makes. If council so chooses to proceed, it's an opportunity cost of not spending it elsewhere.
Fantastic. Yeah, we've heard various actors say that that's not the case, that they couldn't be spent elsewhere, but they are taken from the city budget and would be foregone as a result for that $17.4 million on the operating side. Just want to clarify that $17.4 million on the operating budget could be spent on other priorities the city identifies.
Thank you for the question. Just to clarify, so yes, that's what our report does say, but we do say that should the other sources of funds materialize as identified, like the rent from the stadium and the property tax uplift, they will offset those operating costs and offset them.
Absolutely. The 15.6 was the capital side cost. The operating was 17.4, and that's annual. So actually, the 17.4 is actually $694 million that the city could spend theoretically on a different priority.
Chair, yes, that is an accurate statement.
Thank you. Thank you very much. The report highlights various risks. What is the greatest risk that the Lansdowne 2.0 development poses in your audit, in your view?
Chair, what I would say is obviously our report covers many risks. As the city has a plan in place based off of, as we mentioned, developing that budget, or I like to call it a reserve a little bit for the project. I would say that the greatest risk is cost overruns, because every dollar in excess is a dollar that the city is responsible for covering, and in turn will be a cost that the taxpayer indirectly is covering as well.
Yeah, and in this type of a deal, those cost overruns could compound depending on the risk materializing or not. If we have certain aspects of the red blocks not meeting, say, short-term revenue expectations, it may also affect, or if they chose to leave after 2042, it could affect the stadium, the amount of events. There's a potential compounding effect of some of these risks materializing into the future.
Chair, yes, that is correct. And obviously, if any of these particular elements were to materialize, it would just be less distributions back to the city in order to offset the cost that has been set aside in that city budget of $694 million or $331 million from a net present value perspective.
Thanks so much. My last question to you folks is really around the risks that you identified in the waterfall distributions to the city associated with, in particular, the red blocks. There were a lot of them identified in there, and I just want to make sure we go through each of them so it's clear how much those are. So on the long-term, short-term revenue growth rates, the short-term revenue growth rates, you identified that a potential risk of an estimated decrease of $53 million in the waterfall distributions to the city. Is that correct?
Thank you for the question. So just to clarify, what we did was we're showing the sensitivity associated with the short-term revenue growth. So we were leveraging historical actuals to put downward pressure on the short-term revenue growth rates. But yes, us taking our assumptions, more conservative assumptions about short-term revenue growth rates would have an impact to the city distribution of $53 million.
Yeah, and I was happy to see that you used actual figures, existing figures that we have as the most accurate potential representation of short-term revenue growth. You didn't just pull it out of the air. You've used that specifically. So on that short-term revenue growth piece, $53 million in waterfall distributions to the city that could be forgone if that, if we keep going the way we said we've been going for the last 11 years. You also identified operating expenses. You identified that the long-term expense growth rates, given historical stabilization rates of these operating expense increases, could result in a $30.2 million decreased waterfall distribution to the city. Is that correct?
So again, the scenario associated with long-term expense growth rates was to put, again, 0.25 percentage point reduction or pressure on both the stadium and event center business lines and the red blocks, and that resulted in a net impact of a decrease of a $31 million reduction in waterfall distributions to the city.
Okay, so 53 million, and then we had that 31 million. Beyond the 31 million, you also identified a potential decrease of 30.9 million in waterfall distributions to the city based on short-term average annual operating expense growth rates between 2025 and 2029. Can you just explain that a bit further?
So in that case, so not to be confused with the long-term assumptions,
Yep.
For the short-term expense growth rates, we again put some downward pressure based on historical numbers and with the potential risk that, you know, costs can't be stabilized, specifically for the red blocks. And that's where you get your $30.9 million. I will say that you can't just add the short-term and the long-term impact together because again, one would impact the other.
Right. Now, there was also I just want to make sure I've got this right. The impact would be an estimated $31 million is in waterfall distributions to the city, a decrease. And that was associated with the long-term operating expense growth rates. So I know you can't add them together, but there is a potential compounding effect. So like we've just talked about, $53 million decrease, a $31 million decrease, a $30.9 million decrease. Just what is your assessment of the potential, I guess, if these risks were to materials, which are based on existing figures, what could that mean for the amount of waterfall expectations that we're expecting associated with the red blocks?
Thank you for the question. I wouldn't want to compound. I really like the point is to do the scenarios independent of each other because multiple assumptions would have to come to fruition. We were just really using these as a demonstration of the sensitivity of the assumptions that are underlying the projections. I feel like I want to stop there.
That's fair. So all of these theoretically could materialize?
Chair, yes, all of them could materialize, or they could materialize at a lower level or, you know, in a different direction.
Okay. Well, that's a lot of waterfall distributions that could potentially materialize based on existing figures that you did. If they did all materialize, like what is the potential? I guess I'm trying to come back to what's the difference in what we're expecting as a city to pay off this 17.4 in debt? If these, I think, you know, given you've been made conservative assumptions here, what would be the difference in what we have to pay off that debt?
Chair, I would go back to the point that the distributions back to the city and other various city investments are kind of a bonus in comparison to how the city is planning to pay for that debt. The city is setting aside funds in order to pay for that debt, and anything that materializes from these other potential sources and proceeds become funds available for other city services programs.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the way it's
Bernard,
been,
you're just at your time. If you want to go back
okay,
on.
I'll come back on whenever it's
Okay.
appropriate.
All right, Councillor Devine.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Madam AG and your team, both here and online, for doing all of this work. So I have a series of questions. My notes are all over the place, so I'll try to be clear. On the issue of the contingency, the 10% contingency, and the comparison you've made to the BMO Field operation project. So if I understand it correctly, BMO Field incurred a 25% cost escalation on a project that took 2 years. The duration of this project is longer than that. Do you know enough about that BMO Field project and its escalation to describe whether or not there were any extreme or anomalous or unusual circumstances that led to that 25% cost escalation?
Chair, I'll start off. I'll look to the team if there's anything else that they'd like to add. I wouldn't say that there was anything of anomaly that occurred. That being said, there's always a lot of unknowns that occur. I give you, for example, the current Calgary Event Center that's ongoing. They've been faced with multiple different issues that have arose, including, unfortunately, staff immigration issues. So there's always various things that you can't plan for that we've seen on various projects, but can I go into the exact details? No, and I hate to say it, in many cases, municipalities do not go into extreme detail as to what caused the cost overruns.
And we are indeed a municipality. So it's not like there was a plague of locusts or frogs falling from the sky to attack that project. When you say that project, as many do, experienced any number of uncertainties, is it fair to say that this project, especially over a longer duration, may experience any number of uncertainties?
Chair, yes, that's what we're highlighting. The longer the duration, the more uncertainties and the greater the impact that it can have on the overall cost of the project.
Another thing we heard I believe in your report, certainly from a delegate, is that in the bidding process for whichever companies did bid on this project, there were, I can't remember if it was 1,200 or 1,500 questions brought from the bidders. Do you happen to know if that number of 1,500 questions from bidders stands out as an unusually high or low or average number of questions?
Chair, what I can say is the over 1,500 questions that were received. I actually read every single one of them. So it was a varying degree of types of questions that came through. What I can say, and I hope I'm not speaking out of turn, is it was the largest number that the city's procurement team has ever seen come through. So I do want to put some caveat. There's positives to that. It provides greater clarity as to, that I talked about earlier, that with these types of projects, you think you're all on the same page and you end up finding out that your interpretation that you thought was X is actually Y by the proponent. What we are highlighting is to us, that means that there may have been quite a few issues in clarity with the RFT that was issued. And so it still leaves that risk of perhaps there are still more elements that do require greater clarity that could result in change orders, disputes, and then you get into the legal costs associated with that. So those are just risks and concerns that we're raising. But I actually do want to just add one more point. One of the delegates made mention to that 2.5-month extension, kind of being a bad thing. As an auditor, to me, that was a good thing. Although it ate in, that was 2.5 months that we could have done work. It helped bring greater clarity. And as a taxpayer, I'm happy to see that.
Thank you for clarifying. And I don't at all assume that of those 1,500 questions, some of them may be, advancing more clarity, but you're making it quite clear that you've never seen a procurement model that had that number of questions. And then is it fair to say that that volume of questions, whether they are questions that provide clarity or seek clarity, but that only increases the chance that there's sufficient clarity that it could escalate the chance of change orders and so forth?
I think we're saying it is a risk.
Thank you. So with that in mind, and in comparing this project to, let's say, BMO Field or any other projects, is it reasonable to assume that this project could just as likely incur the same level of cost escalations as did the BMO Field project?
Chair, as we mentioned in our report, there's a risk. There are many unknowns, and there are issues that come with the scope, duration, and interdependencies of the project. As a taxpayer, I hope it's not 25%.
But if we've set a 10% contingency and that project experienced a 25% escalation, is there anything that you've seen in this project that gives you a sense of confidence or assurance with us having set a 10% threshold?
Chair, I'll go back to the point of us performing follow-up work. In order to be able to get that level of comfort or to make that level of statement, we would have had to have done a significant amount of additional work. But I look to my team if there's anything else they'd like to add. Okay.
No, great. I'll move on to my next question on the issue of the expense rate growth model. So you pointed out in your report concerns that you have with the expense side of the ledger in operations. It seems where you were pointing out a huge discrepancy in past projections compared to actual expenses, and suggesting that the modest expense increase of the current plan may be overly optimistic. Is that a fair representation of your position on that issue?
Just to clarify, our report indicated that there was some of the assumptions relative to the Red Blacks expenses and revenues were optimistic relative to historical trends.
And we have, can I also ask if using the term optimistic, and in past reports, we've heard that the use of the word optimistic by professionals in your field is often a word that basically conveys caution?
Chair, I would say that's a fair assumption, whether it be with financial projections or estimating costs. There is an innate optimism bias that comes when determining those figures. And that's, excuse my poor vocabulary. It's not a knock on staff. They're passionate about their work and they feel that that's what they're going to be able to do. And that's what it's going to cost. So we do caution that. But again, it's just an inherent risk in every project.
I appreciate commending staff for being passionate about their work. It's in these cases where we kind of hope to remove passion from the argument and to get nothing but dispassionate analysis. On to the subject of the air rights. So in a comment I heard from a delegate yesterday, they were referring, because as I understand it with the air rights, with the 65 million, right now, all that Mirabella is committed to is the $1 million upon signing, and that they have a duration of time whereby they have to pay forward others. But as I understand it, they are not bound to any of those other payments unless certain conditions are met. One person described the $1 million deposit as more akin to an option to purchase, as opposed to a binding contract. And I know it is a contract, but in your opinion, the description of the $1 million deposit as an option to purchase, does that sound like an apt description?
Chair, what I would say is the clauses within the purchase and sale agreement for the air rights allows Mirabella to pull out with a low cost associated with it.
Yeah.
When I say low cost, as in for a company like Mirabella, that would be seen as a lower cost. To them, they would have to determine the cost benefit of moving forward or not moving forward.
Yeah, thank you. On the issue of the scope of your audit, so I understand that the scope of this follow-up is limited by the nature of the original audit and the parameters for follow-up. I wanted to ask you questions about things outside your scope, but you made it clear that you cannot do that, and I respect that. But one thing I wanted to ask is, are there any things, given that I assume that your mandate is to provide us with as much information as we can to make as informed a decision as we can in helping me exercise my fiduciary responsibilities to the corporation, to the city, in you wanting to fill your role in that, are there any elements that you wished had been in scope, given your mandate?
Chair, I guess I'll go back to statements that I've made in the past, not today though, Councillor, there were other elements that we had raised that we would be considering to review, that being the project agreements. That is an area that I would have liked to have looked at in more detail. We looked at it from a perspective of how does it impact the model? And again, same with the construction or the RFT, kind of the clauses associated with that, which will end up supporting or kind of making up the majority of the contract with EBC. Those are elements that we would have liked to have looked at, that also were elements considered within the motion that council asked us to consider doing an agile audit of, which was to look at the partnership agreements or various agreements. So those would have been areas that I think we would have considered looking at had we had more time. That being said, it still does not preclude us from doing so. Should council on Friday decide to move forward, those agreements will still be open for us to review.
Councillor, your time's up.
All right, I'll get back on. Thank you.
Councillor Tierney?
Great. Thank you very much. And thank you again. Obviously, I just want to make sure there's a couple of things. Last time we had to unpack a bit of a bird's nest around automated speed enforcement versus red light. And that's why it's great that we're here to be able to clear up some of the bird nest confusion that was around that one. And we determined it was red light. So I think it's a good opportunity to clear some of the other items up. I hear scope is being used a lot as part of the wording, and this might be more to staff, but is it outside your scope to look at other things like Champlain Arc Center, where certainly we would have seen this kind of same thing with the 3P or with our paramedic facilities, or was that simply not in scope?
Chair, what I would say is our audit is on Lansdowne. We do audits of all of those fun
Right,
things.
but did you look at those others outside of recreation, or was it just specific just to this?
This audit is specific to
Thank you.
Lansdowne as requested by
So
council.
on the other comment that was made yesterday as well, I heard that this was a sprint audit. Does that lessen what kind of audit this is? Apparently that was words associated with you, that this is a sprint audit.
Chair, I'd like to clarify, this actually isn't an audit. What we have
Yeah.
done is we have performed follow-up procedures on her previous audit. So we are looking to ensure that management has taken action as they indicated they would. And so that is what we are reporting on. We're reporting on the actions they've taken and raised any other risks as a result of performing those follow-up procedures.
Thank you for that clarification. That's what I was looking for. Thank you.
Councillor Menard.
Thanks very much, Chair. And I just wanted to finalize my comments and question from that last round. On the 17.4 million, that's one aspect of risk on the operating side that may not come to fruition if some of these decreases in waterfalls occur in terms of paying back that debt. There's also the risk outside of that 17.4, because that's just the $331 million in debt. The outside other risks have to do with the capital costs we're gaining from the air rights sale. And I mean, we're using some debenture from Lansdowne 1 as well. But on the air rights sale, I think that's the biggest source of potential risk outside of that 17.4, 331. Is that accurate, or would you describe it that way?
Thank you for the question. I don't know if I would have described it that way, but I would say that there are different areas of risk. So yeah, the 17.4 is an opportunity cost, and because there have been identified sources of proceeds, as I mentioned, that could be offsetted if there are risks associated with those funds, and if they don't come to fruition, it would impact how much of an offset it is.
Okay, on that Mirabella piece, so we've said, and I think you've said in your report, this may be a bit of a lower risk compared to us not meeting our construction timelines, but them walking away with a relatively low amount that they've put down as a preliminary offer, that 1 million that then moves to 4.7 a couple of years in, I believe. But on them not on the construction interdependencies not meeting the timeline for a go on the buildings. Can you remind me again? It's a $13.7 million penalty the city would have to pay if we didn't meet that timeline?
Thank you for the question. Again, I would probably refer you to clarify with staff, but our understanding from the draft purchase and sale agreement is after December 2028, which is a milestone. If after that point, something happens, the city that this contract is canceled, there would be a $13 million penalty by the city. But I would look to maybe clarify that with staff.
Okay. I'll further clarify with staff when we get to that point. But I guess is this a higher risk than just say them walking away, because there would both be that penalty paid, and theoretically they also wouldn't move to build at that time, and we would have to go out again to tender, and then there's a risk of air rights not being air rights potentially being a lower bid, and then property taxes potentially changing into the future. Do I have that relatively accurate?
Chair, yes, that would be accurate. Obviously, then, in our presumption, and staff have confirmed this, if Mirabella were to pull out of the agreement, that they would retender. Obviously, there's delays that come from that. And then the question becomes, what would be the bids with regards to the air rights? Could be lower, could be higher.
Right.
So,
and in this case, we only got 2 bids for an extended bid tender period with a lot of questions answered. At the end of the day, just 2 formal bids came in. Okay. Look, thanks, Chair.
Actually,
sorry.
Chair?
Can I just answer one? I want to make sure I clarify this. The 13 million, because I just checked the report, would be the city would have to pay if it was as a result of the city pulls out.
Yes, I understood that.
Yeah. Okay.
So the city, if the city can't meet its timelines for them to build in time, when we've said they're set to build, $13.7 million would be owed to Mirabella from the city because of their
13 million.
13 million because of their design, the time put into the design and the specs to get things built.
I would just add to that, just in all fairness with staff, is they would be, let's say they miss the timeline, there's still a negotiation period that can occur with Mirabella as well, and that could result in no cost back to the city.
Okay.
So.
Okay, that's very helpful. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Devine, do you mind if I go to Councillor Dudas? She hasn't been on there yet. Thanks. Councillor Dudas.
Thank you. I just, I have a question to increase my clarity of this. And first of all, I just want to say how much I appreciated this report. I find immense value when your team does this work because it provides us with greater insight into the risks, the rewards, gives us clarity on what we're making a decision on. This point I just wanted to seek some information on. So the property tax uplift that you speak to as potential risk or potentially in flux, for my clarity, did you calculate that at 2% for the residential side?
Thank you for the question. The risk that we flagged was more to do with the impact on the property tax uplift or residential relative to the mix between condominiums and rentals. So we just put the different scenarios of that mix and then ran it through what the calculation, not the percentage at all.
And just to add to that, Chair, I think what we want to make sure, and I want to make sure this is clear, we're really in that area, really just trying to demonstrate the sensitivity of what could happen with different unit mixes. And that's because there's still many years before Mirabella makes a determination on what type of unit mix they will want to put out there. It's going to be based off of what market conditions are and obviously what's more advantageous for them. So we are really just demonstrating that level of sensitivity, and we're not stating that the current mix isn't an appropriate one.
No, and I fully appreciate that. Actually, I liked that insight. But again, and forgive me, when you were calculating it, though, you must have had a percentage in mind. Was it at the 2%?
I don't think there was a particular percentage in mind. We're just giving a demonstration of what were to happen if the condominium were to drop and the impact on the property tax uplift that would be available.
Okay. Okay. No, I appreciate that because, sorry, forgive me, I cut you off.
Sorry, I'll just clarify. So the assumption right now within the calculations and the projections show a unit mix of 50-50. So 50% to condominiums and 50% to rentals. While we did a sensitivity, across the gamut from 0 to 100, I think our narrative describes just to emphasize, if it went down to 30% condominium instead of 50%, the impact would be a $2.9 million change in our property tax uplift net present value over the life of the agreement. So we just life of the debt, but I just wanted to clarify that.
Okay. Thank you very much. I wanted to clarify that for myself as well. I appreciate it. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Devine.
Thank you, Chair. I had two more questions, but I wanted to get just one little bit of clarity there. With regards to the potential, I think it's the $13 million penalty that the city could be owing to Mirabella if certain conditions are met or not met. I think I heard you say, Joanne, that penalty could be due if the city were to pull out. But if I understand correctly, there are penalties, perhaps that one, that are due not only if the city elects to walk away, but if the city is late in meeting certain timelines. That $13 million penalty, is that ascribed only if we walk away or if we fail to meet certain conditions or timelines?
I think I would want to just to be 100% sure.
If only you'd had time to do this properly. I understand.
The numbers are in my head and dates. So yeah, I think staff would be in the best position to answer that question for you.
Pardon me?
Staff would be in the best position.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Going back to the issue of opportunity cost, because I really do appreciate how much you highlighted in your report that all of these opportunity costs, it is an opportunity for the city to elect to go in one direction or to go in another direction. It's no surprise to anyone that a majority of the responses I've had from residents are, why are we doing this when there are so many things we should be doing? Now, you've identified a number of categories of opportunity costs, whether that be the municipal accommodations tax, an increase that we have not yet ever, I believe, or at least not in a long time, approved an increase, or exercised our discretionary power to increase the tax for a certain goal, or the opportunity cost of citywide reserves, 13.8 million in this case. The opportunity cost of stormwater reserves, something that is certainly concerning to me, 1.8 million. And of course, perhaps the largest opportunity cost, the 17.4 million coming from our tax base. And make no bones, that full amount could be exercised if this project fails to generate revenues. So a question I have for you, I know that as AG, you either perform audits that we direct you to perform, And forgive me if I've got that wrong. And sometimes, well, you certainly perform, I got it wrong, I'm sure. You certainly perform audits within the scope of what we approve, but I also know that you initiate audits on your own, based on your own roles and or responsibilities. If what you see here is a massive opportunity cost, perhaps of historic proportions, when you factor all of that together over the duration, is it ever within the scope of the AG to initiate an audit that looks at whether or not council is exercising its own duty in the proper allocation of our public money in choosing between one priority and or a set of other priorities? Is that within your scope?
Chair, I guess maybe I'll just reiterate what my mandate is obviously I'm responsible for holding the administration, so that being staff, as well as city council in holding itself to ensuring stewardship of public funds and value for money. That is, my role as an accountability officer is to look at those particular elements. And just to clarify your piece with regards to council direction, council cannot direct my office. They can make requests for me to consider. And then at the end of the day, council is responsible for approving the work plan that we put forward. So by nature, the audits that come forward are those that I'm recommending. And then council can obviously critique that. But going to your question with regards to looking at, opportunity costs, it's very important to go back to the priorities of council are set by council. That is not for me to question. What I can state is if I were to look at a particular element, I can tell you whether or not you're getting value for money. I can tell you whether or not there are additional risks for you to look at. I can tell you whether or not there's non-compliances. So we can look at those particular elements and report back. But as to stating whether or not council has made the right determination of prioritization, that is not for me as Auditor General to comment on.
Thank you very much. My last question. So I know that it's been raised many times. Every project has risk. If I spend $1,000 on a flex stake on this street and don't do it on that street, I may be doing a risk because perhaps that street needs it more. But is it fair to say that given the scale of this investment, given the amount of risk that you've identified, given the fact that all of that risk can be seen as exacerbated because of the duration of that project? So yes, every project has risk. But in terms of the risk that this project poses to the corporation, in comparison to the benefits, for sure, but would this risk, just using expression, in your opinion, exist in a league of its own?
Chair, I would bring members of committee and council back to the great enterprise risk management training sessions we had this spring, which was obviously staff's responsibility is to, help you understand the risks associated with the various activities of the city. Then they have brought forward what they have defined as appetite and tolerance levels for the city as a whole. And councillors are to use that information and to determine whether or not they feel that the decision in front of them meets the risk tolerance that the city has set for themselves. You need to look at that risk reward and determine whether or not you feel comfortable. I don't think it's appropriate for me to necessarily state that the risk of this project supersedes another. We've highlighted the risks. It's whether or not you feel that those fall within that risk reward, those parameters that have been set.
Is it within scope of me to ask you if you've laid out a matrix of risk appetite? Are you able to observe or comment on whether or not, if this were to pass, that council has taken on a greater appetite for risk in this than perhaps council has taken on in other measures? For example, we have identified, many, many times that we have a $10 billion infrastructure gap, but we've expressed that we only have enough ability to handle a certain portion of that at this time. That does expose us to greater risk. Are you able to opine on whether or not it seems our appetite for risk is a little bit hungrier today than otherwise?
So Chair, first and foremost, I can only opine. I can only give an opinion on something that I've actually audited. As I have not audited every risk and opportunity linked with the Lansdowne 2.0 redevelopment project, I cannot really provide to you to tell you whether or not the risk associated with the project is outside of the appetite that council has set for the city.
Thank you very much. So just before we go to questions for staff, I just thought I might look at the actual recommendations you made. So my question is, the first recommendation you've made is that you want to make sure that staff have an established risk management approach for this. And management's response was, yes, they do. Are you satisfied with the management response to your first recommendation?
Well, I believe management response also has reporting back, and one of that aspects of that recommendation, and I somewhat alluded to it when answering one of Councillor Devine's questions, is municipal staff, and I'm not speaking Ottawa, I'm talking about in general, when it comes to these large projects, usually don't report back on usage of contingency until towards the end of the project. And that's because you're still working within your budget. That being said, what we'd like to see is that greater transparency when you know that there are buckets that you had budgeted X for as part of the project and you see that you're going over. We want that transparency to come out. So we're looking for staff to come back to keep council informed of what's going on with the project and whether or not there are any changes in costs, because it's just very important. We're looking for transparency with this particular project, and that to ensure that council has provided the information they need to continue to do their oversight responsibility.
Right. And staff have said, yes, they will do that.
That is correct.
Great. So thank you. The second recommendation is that staff clarify the affordable housing allocation is appropriate. And they said they will do that. So are you satisfied with the staff response?
Essentially, as we've mentioned, just with us bringing forward this particular element, council is now informed. And if they are comfortable with that internal allocation and the impact to affordable housing, that will have addressed our recommendation. We're really just trying to ensure that that was brought to council's attention and that they were comfortable with that.
Great. Well, it has been, and there's a management response to say that they will do that. Recommendation 3 is to ensure there's an annual review of financial projections. Staff have said they will do that. Are you satisfied with staff's response to your recommendation?
Chair, yes, we are.
Okay, so it seems like we have 3 recommendations from the Auditor General. Staff have responded. The Auditor General is comfortable with the staff responses, so council will now go to questions for staff. Councillor Carr.
Thank you very much. Thank you to staff. First question, we've had a lot of discussion today about opportunity cost. As I mentioned when I asked the Auditor General, generally speaking, I've always seen opportunity cost. In order to properly evaluate it, you have to have the costs and benefits of every option available, and they must be considered and weighed against the others. Can I get...
Chair, maybe we could just wait till staff get to the table.
All right, Councillor Carr, we're going to start your time again there so we can all hear that question.
Okay, perfect. Thanks. It was just a clarification on opportunity cost. As I mentioned earlier, usually I've always seen opportunity cost really weigh the cost and benefits of every option available. And in order to have a proper evaluation or use of opportunity cost. And I'm wondering, I guess it would be Cyril, maybe, if you could speak to how opportunity cost is generally used.
Through the chair. Yes, so in this scenario, what you have before you is a opportunity to move forward a financially sound business case to invest in a city asset. If we choose not to invest in this asset, then we need to move the opportunities to move that money to another city asset. And by doing so, I wouldn't frame it as an opportunity cost. I would frame it as negative opportunity cost, if you will, because if this funding strategy isn't adopted, that means this asset now will cost in excess of $750 million, which would add to our $10.8 billion infrastructure gap, which we would then have to have a funding strategy for that bigger gap. So the opportunity really is to leverage the revenue generation from this city asset to reinvest back into the city asset to actually relieve funding constraints on all the other city assets.
Thanks. So would you say that it's atypical to look at opportunity cost as a standalone item?
No. Sorry, Chair, it wouldn't be a typical practice to look at just one isolated project by project.
Okay, so it's atypical. Yep. Okay, thanks. I said atypical, not typical. Thanks. The report noted that the Office of the Auditor General undertook this report to provide real-time assurance and support informed decision-making throughout the project life cycle by council members. They also noted the importance of transparency. I'm wondering if quickly the project team could run through the other kinds of evaluations that are done, independent third-party reviews as part of a project in which council may have access to if they ask to see the documents. Would that be possible just to run through that?
Thank you for the question, Madam Chair. Maybe I start, and if we need to get into further details, I can bring somebody else from my team. So we have done a lot of cost estimating throughout the design. We have brought external expertise. We have brought structural engineers. We have brought construction experts, our architects, of course, different expertise depending on what piece of the project we were working on. We have a number of risk management sessions where we were identifying risks that we have in our risk registry to be able to either mitigate if those risks were identified for design or get ready to have mitigations during construction. We have done a lot of, cost estimating exercises. We have done value engineering. Just clarifying, it's just to be more effective. So no scope was reduced. Nothing was cut at the project. But what we've done during the value engineering is finding different ways to be more effective and to design smarter.
Okay, thanks. And if any council member ever wanted to review that documentation, they would be able to meet with staff and take a look at that?
Absolutely.
Thank you. Next question's on the affordable housing piece with respect to the air rights. Is it typical that city staff would deduct the cost of doing business and obtain a net sale price of lands before contributing to affordable housing?
Yes, Chair, that's correct.
So that's typical.
Typical is that the cost of the transaction, it's the net proceeds that are used to determine the amount that's dedicated to affordable housing. So we deduct the cost of the transaction prior to making that allocation.
Okay, thank you very much. In terms of the complexity of this project, from a real property perspective, I'm wondering if you could speak to how the complexity of this project was determined and why the contingency was assigned at 10%. I'd asked some questions previously, for example, about a rebuild and a renovation typically, and I'm wondering if we could just speak to those questions.
Yes, thank you for the question, Chair. So when we take a look at the two civil projects that we're undertaking, they're not necessarily complex, but I think as we've heard today, there are schedule interdependencies. And so there are many ways that we would look at non-financial strategies to de-risk a project like this. So my colleague Karina talked about all of the various experts that looked at not only scope and budget, but we also looked at schedule as well. And so, and as was mentioned earlier, during the bid tender, there was also an extension in the bid tender schedule, and it gave us an opportunity to listen to the feedback and make further amendments to the overall construction schedule. So what we will have is we currently have very robust project management oversight for all of our typical projects, and we are adding additional oversight in terms of risk management board and scope change board as well. So we are adding that in terms of non-financial strategies to manage the risk, and that's why we do believe that 10% is an adequate contingency measure.
So in other real property projects that you've done, 10% is, have you assessed other projects at 10%?
Our guideline basically says 5 to 10%, which is industry standard, and our typical contingency on construction is 10%.
Okay, thank you very much. It was noted that the MAT, municipal accommodation tax, could be used for potentially used for other priorities. Would someone be able to explain to me the discussions that happened with Ottawa Tourism in negotiating this municipal accommodation tax, and if it is something that could be leveraged elsewhere?
So it started with a conversation with Auto Tourism, identifying how we could support Lansdowne. And so it was they that suggested the 1% in support of the Lansdowne project. If Lansdowne 2.0 were not to proceed, it's unlikely they would be supportive of increasing the accommodation tax by 1%.
Okay, thanks very much. I missed a question. Sorry. When to Tammy, when you were talking about the interdependency schedules, I noted the risk of that was noted in the audit report. And, we've got a fairly linear path with respect to how we're going to do the event center, then we're going to do the stands, then we're going to do the retail and towers. If one of those elements runs over and interrupts the project schedule, what are the mitigations in place?
I think what I'd like to add, Chair, is that we also have some built-in buffer in the schedule. And so currently we have a 3-month buffer between the construction of finishing the event center and then starting the north side stands. We also have our substantial completion to the Mirabella contract is about another 8 months. And we can also turn over the site to Mirabella about 18 months into the construction of the north side stands. So we do believe that we have a lot of built-in buffer into the schedule so that not one schedule delay bumps everything. And so part of our oversight is also scheduling reviews, and we will have experts with us as well. So that will be part of our rigorous oversight in terms of making sure that any delays are identified quickly and early enough, and that it is in our contracts. The contractors must mitigate those delays. So it's very much a collaborative environment between the contractor and the owner to look at those and find creative solutions to mitigate any of those delays.
Okay, thank you very much. And just one last question. It was noted in the auditor's report that there was a large amount of questions that came in as a result of the tender. I think it was 1,500 questions. Is that something that was alarming, or and how did those questions help shape the process?
Thank you for the question, Madam Chair. I have to say that when we saw the amount of questions we received, we were incredibly happy. In our opinion, not only the amount of questions, but the type of questions we got. It shows that the contractors were committed. It shows that they wanted to clearly understand. It allows them to have a very good understanding of the design they have in front of them to be able to do a fair and clear bid. So the short answer is no, we did not have concerns. We were actually very happy about it.
Okay, thank you very much. I'll let someone else go.
Thank you, Councillor Hill.
Thank you, Chair Curry. To follow up on Councillor Carr, there's a concern that an investment in Lansdowne, which is a city asset, directly competes with funding for our long-term infrastructure funding gap. But isn't Lansdowne itself 100% city-owned infrastructure? And if we vote no to Lansdowne, what impact will have on our infrastructure deficit?
I can start that question, Madam Chair. The councillor states accurately that currently in our asset management plans, we did not include the two assets at Lansdowne being the event center and the north side stands or the south side stands. And so if we were to not proceed with 2.0, we would have to review the asset management plans to include those assets and the requirements to renew and replace, and essentially develop a new financial strategy in order to achieve that.
Thank you. We've heard concerns from residents today that the $65 million sale of the air rights to Mirabella may not materialize. Could you please confirm that we have a signed contract with the builder? And do you have any reason to doubt that Mirabella will honor their contract?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I can confirm that we have negotiated the agreement of purchase and sale with the developer Mirabella for the residential towers, as well as the mixed-use elements that will be city-owned. That agreement is ready to execute should council approve going forward with the Lansdowne 2.0 redevelopment. Based on the negotiations, it was several months of working actively with them. We have, I'd say at this point, fairly low concern that they would walk away from this deal. Through that negotiation period, they expressed a lot of interest in this particular site as a key entertainment district. They see a lot of value in that. They are also interested in entering the Ottawa market, and as well, the agreement is structured with financial penalties, but also with a lot of active work that will be required from the developer, which they will have to invest into the project in addition to any kind of financial penalties for walking away. So for example, they need to be ready to begin construction 3 months after we turn over the site plan, the north side stands. So that means that they need to go through the detailed design, they need to go through a site plan. So they're going to invest quite a lot in the project in the meantime. So based on those factors, we assess that the likelihood of them walk away is quite low.
And given the levels of approval that the city are required to give to Lansdowne 2.0, is it fair to say that that is as concrete as you can be at this point? Like, you can't commit to a sale if council hasn't approved the project.
That's correct.
The Auditor General found that the City of Toronto had a different approach to their contingency for the expansion of BMO Field. Have you had an opportunity to speak with Toronto officials on their approach to this project, and what lessons do you think Ottawa can take from Toronto's approach to BMO Field?
Councillor, I'm happy to start, and then I'll turn to my colleagues at the table. I know the report references, I think, the 2016 expansion of the BMO Field. There's, I think, 2 projects actually that are going on there. There's one now related to, and we wanted to have an understanding in terms of what the construction looks like there, given sort of the FIFA involvement in it. And as we understand it, our colleagues in Toronto shared with us, it's kind of like a difficult, long, precarious negotiation in terms of that expansion. First of all, it started pre-COVID, and as we all know, COVID hit, and I think we saw it here a little bit as well. There were some increases with respect to pricing, but then layer on that the FIFA requirements, which were changing. I think it's fair to say not regularly, but on a, enough where it would have an impact on that project, the outcome and the cost of that project. But I would ask my colleagues at the table just to speak about perhaps a new build versus a renovation, because I think that's the applicable piece that we would take away from here to understand what the impact is on the city in this project.
Just for a second, the Auditor General has her hand up.
Chair, I just wanted to make, I guess, a clarification with regards to Councillor Hill's statement. We are not stating that this is an exact replica of what is going on here in the city. We gave that as an example of an event center type project and how costs can go over and in what types of situations. So I just want to give that clarity. We are not stating that the city's project is exactly the same. We are not stating that this is, again, I think I already gave clarity. We're not stating that there should be a 25% contingency. So I just want to ensure that there's clarity and that people aren't reading into an example that we have provided and stating that we're saying that this is what's going to happen. So
thank you for that. You actually, I think Joanne said that earlier. We're not saying 25%. So thank you for that clarification and that clarification again. And of course, no 2 projects are the same anywhere in the world on this earth. So thank you for that clarification. And I think the city manager had asked a question of staff to respond.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I think as stated by a couple of people around this table, it is very difficult to compare projects. And so it really depends on also your procurement methodology has a direct impact as well in terms of how much a project is going to cost. And so back in 2024, Council had directed and accepted staff's recommendation to conduct a design bid build. And that was to ensure that there was going to be as much cost assurance as we can and to also lock down the design as early as we can. So when we look at other project procurement methodologies, things that combine design and construction at the same time, there's a bit less transparency, and it's an evolution of a design when the two parties come together. So those are one of the, things that would be different, and would have to be, when you're comparing projects, there's a number of factors that you have to take a look at before you would say you've come up with a comparable.
If we were to make the comparison to Lansdowne 1.0, did that fall within the contingency?
Madam Chair, we don't have people at the table that has direct experience with the construction and the cost for 1.0, but we do know that it was not a design bid build, and it was a design build contract.
The Auditor General identified that $15.6 million of the Lansdowne project will be funded through capital reserves. What parts of the project will those funds be used to cover, and why do we need to take from capital reserves at all?
So I can start in terms of the original discussions with OSEG, that these were costs that were unique to the city and municipal management of capital projects. That if OSEG had been delivering it, or the private sector had been delivering, these are costs that are over and above that. These are unique to municipal project management of capital projects, and why we're funding it through our capital reserves.
And if we don't proceed with Lansdowne 2.0, why will we need to dip into capital reserves to the tune of $22 million?
So the $22 million would be wrapped into the entire 418.8, and you have the funding strategy for that. That's 331 million in debt. If does not proceed, we cannot issue debt. You can only issue debt on a capital asset. And so that 22 million would have to come from cash.
The Auditor General expressed concern that the budgeting for Lansdowne project over the course of the 40-year plus span of the city asset could come at the cost of the city's ability to proceed with other priorities. By budgeting for Lansdowne 2.0, will the city face any limitation in its ability to pursue major projects like an incinerator or road investments?
Through the chair, no. The funding strategy outlined here, as I mentioned, we kept this asset outside of all the other city assets. So again, this city asset is kept outside of the $10.8 billion city asset infrastructure gap. Why we did that? Because we have a funding strategy before you, or will be before council on Friday, that basically, 69% of the revenue is from revenue sources of this city asset. The other programs will be funded through the other sources. So this actually helps us solve the $10.8 billion infrastructure gap. It does not add to that gap. If this is not proceeding, that gap becomes much bigger and becomes much more challenging to solve.
In your previous financial forecasting, you predicted red-black revenue growth would increase by 5.9% annually from 23 to 29. The AG points out that annual growth only increased on average about 5% from 22 to 25, and in the new Lansdowne 2.0 projections, you're forecasting annual average growth of 9.85% over the next 4 seasons. Why are you confident in the new projections after the city appears to have been off by less than a percentage point in our last forecast?
So when we talk about projections, we're talking about projecting out to 2070. And so just looking at the initial first years and saying that you're going to adjust it 5% versus the 9% to get to that 2070 year throws off the projections completely. Like, it's exponential. And so we're very careful not to drop it too much either. And so what we looked at, it looks like a 9% increase in the short term, but in the longer term, we actually reduced the projection by $30 million. In the last report in 2023, the Auditor General had asked us to look at the Red Black's revenue projections and expenses. We did, and we actually adjusted those projections by $30 million. And now the 9% is more in the short term, and there's actually a bump up in distribution rights, revenue coming in 2027. So that accounts for a lot of that bump up also. We are projecting based on an average year over the last few years trends, and then projecting out forward.
And my last question for now, I will likely come back on after. One of the delegates earlier referred to a one-for-one, dollar-to-dollar example of we could spend X amount of money on a Lansdowne or Y amount of money on a whole bunch of other assets. So specifically, would the $694 million in estimated debt servicing costs for Lansdowne 2.0 be available for other projects if Lansdowne 2.0 does not proceed?
So Chair, when we look at the 694, it has to be taken into account the 658 million of revenue that would be offsetting it. And so we would have 35 million perhaps available over 40 years for other projects. You can't look at it in isolation. The business case demonstrate that we are dependent on those revenues to come in. There's a lot of assumptions that the revenue would never come in. There's a just as equal likelihood that it'll be greater than what we're projecting. We are extremely conservative in our estimates of projections. And so the 694 is offset by 658 in revenue.
And Chair, maybe if I can just add as well, just for crystal clear clarity, the 35 million, that might be available for other assets, but then this city asset of 418 million becomes part of the 10.8 plus, which is projected to be in excess of 800 million, in the next 10 years. So the 35 million is still not true money to invest somewhere else, because now I got to put this price tag of this city asset over into my 10.8 billion, which now becomes 11.6 billion.
Thank you very much. And so just to put a fine point on that issue, and then I'm finished, Madam Chair, it is not accurate to say that you could take $416 million of Lansdowne money and simply say no to Lansdowne, and the city still have $416 million to go spend on a bunch of other stuff.
That's correct. That's correct.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Oh my gosh, how many times do we have to say the same thing? All right, who is next? Councillor Kavanaugh.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you to staff. On page 19 of the report, the Auditor General's Office outlines the allocation for affordable housing in this current Lansdowne 2.0 plan. Based on the motion passed in November 2023, Council directed that 25% of the first 39 million and 50% of any proceeds beyond the 35 million from the sale of air rights be allocated to Affordable Housing Reserve Fund. And based on the net proceeds of 58.3 million, this should have resulted in a contribution of 19.4 million towards affordable housing. Given that we consider housing and homelessness an emergency and a crisis, we need every dollar we can get. However, the report flags that the allocation of 10 million to parking has reduced this contribution by 5 million down to 14.4 million, which is not what Council had expected. Can you explain how this decision was made to take 5 million from affordable housing to parking at Lansdowne? And why was this not brought to Council as an issue?
So Chair, with due respect, it was brought to Council as a recommendation. In the recommendations in the report, we're asking Council to consider including that 10 million net cost to build that parking that attracted the developer and the air rights revenue, to allocate that to the portion of that attracted the developer to that site. So the 140 additional spaces, if not for those 140 spaces, we likely would not have attracted very many developers to that site. And so we're just asking Council to consider that the net cost of offering that parking should be allocated to the cost of doing so.
I find it very concerning that parking has taken priority over that 5 million for affordable housing. We know from the asset management plans released earlier this year that the city is facing a projected $10.8 billion gap between projected infrastructure needs and planned funding. So we all recognize this funding is desperately needed. When do you project that the city will realistically see any revenue from this updated Lansdowne 0.20 project so we can tackle this huge deficit?
Sorry, Chair, are you referring to the waterfall distributions?
Well, the fact that we have a projected deficit of 10.8 billion overall for the city, it's been said that we're going to have, with this proposal, we'll have money to spend on other assets in the future. So when can we expect that with the cost?
Yeah, so there was a document one attached to the report, Lansdowne 2.0 report that shows when those revenues are expected. The guaranteed payments will be starting when the event center is built. And so starting in 2028, we will start to see revenues coming in from the waterfall. From the property tax uplift, that's around 2035. The municipal accommodation tax would start in 2028. Actually, it's 2026. The recommendation is to start as of January 1, 2026. So they all come in at different points in time, but all of that has been accounted for in the report.
Well, I remain concerned that we're talking about a project that's going to take 50 years to complete in terms of the financing. And there's projects all over the city that we all can see in our wards that desperately need work and are not getting the funding they need. And this project is taking away for it. So I think we need to take a look at that very seriously. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Kitts?
If I
Oh,
might
sorry.
clarify, if not for Lansdowne 2.0, these revenue sources would not be available.
Yes, thank you for clarifying that. Councillor Kitts?
Thank you very much, Chair. Can staff confirm how tariff exposure and inflationary risk were built into the Class A estimate, and how the fixed price construction contract could limit the liability for those risks?
Thank you for the question. So we have a fixed price contract that has taken in consideration any escalation and any tariff to date. Moving forward, we are going to do, our contractor has committed to buy local. They're going to use market in Asia, in Canada. And if we are hit by a particular tariff that that is a surprise that we have not considered, the contractors still need to go through a process. They need to mitigate, so they need to find alternatives. And I know the Auditor General referred to this earlier. So it doesn't mean that automatically they will get paid for additional tariff. They have to mitigate. They have to find alternatives, ways to deal with the particular material that is impacted, and they also have to prove that that is the only way they can do the project. So there's a lot of risk management and mitigation that needs to take place and will take place before we even agree to a particular payment on a material that is impacted by tariff. I don't know if Cyril, you want to?
Yeah, Chair, I think it's also important for me, as I've been before Finance and Corporate Services Committee, Council, going back to January, February, when this tariff issue came up to light, I've provided several updates to Committee and Council. Joanne continues to be at the forefront in terms of working with other municipalities, the province, the feds, the construction industry. We've increased new things into our procurement bylaws, our process in terms of making sure we do buy local, support Canadian where we can. And we're going to continue to do that. This project is not unique in terms of the tariff impacts. The other 1,652, 54 projects that we have in flight are exposed to tariff impacts. That's a reality. But we have the risk mitigations in place, and we continue to have those risk mitigations in place as this continues to change and unfold.
Thank you very much for those responses. And what process is in place for managing change orders and tracking contingency use?
We are setting up above and beyond our regular project management practices that reviews everything. It reviews because risk can lead into change orders. So we have all our project management practices to review schedule and budget and scope. Any change order or any change to the project is going to go through a review board that we are putting in place for this project that is going to assess the real need of that change. And we are going to have in that board people from our project management office and different experts, internals or external, depending on what is the item that we are discussing.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Carr and I were on the same wavelength. She asked a couple of my questions, but to follow up on my question to the Auditor General about the sequencing of construction, I think I heard you say that you're confident that you have mitigation strategies in place, that you're not worried. That there's mitigation for the project to stay on schedule. That was what I heard earlier to Councillor Carr.
Yes, that is correct. And we agree that schedule is a risk. And so that is why we are making sure that we have added governance to make sure that we mitigate that as quickly as possible.
Okay, thank you. And similarly, the number of questions asked and the bid extension sort of was perceived as a negative in the report, where I thought that likely led to less ambiguity and a refinement of the bid. You would agree with that?
Yes, Councillor.
Yeah. Okay. Cyril, I believe I've heard you say you have confidence in this financial strategy. Is that accurate?
Chair, that's 100% accurate.
Thank you. And I appreciate that staff have accepted all the recommendations. There's a lot of you in front of us today, a lot of our senior leadership team. So I just wanted to put it out there. Is there anything that either came up in the report or in the discussion today that you would like to further clarify?
Thank you, Chair, for allowing the question and us to elaborate. Maybe I can start off in terms of we agree with the auditor's recommendation, and so it is quite clear that there are a number of risks that we need to manage and manage very carefully, and so we will be having regular and above and beyond oversight. And I think what we want to also highlight is there's been a number of non-financial strategies that have been taken even when this was in concept, right, to make sure that we are managing scope, schedule, and budget. And so I appreciate there've been comments around, optimism. And so I think there is a difference between maybe optimism and confidence, but there's been a tremendous amount of due diligence and third-party reviews that support the project.
Okay, thank you very much. I was going to conclude by asking to confirm if we vote no, it doesn't necessarily mean we'll have money to spend on other things, but I think the chair would get mad at me if I asked that. So thank you very much.
We could hear it one more time.
We can get t-shirts.
Councillor Menard.
Yeah, thanks very much, Chair. Thanks for answering our questions. On the $17.4 million, could council choose to spend those funds on other priorities or not? Yes or no is fine.
So the 17.4 is built up over time, but the affordability is based on the other revenues coming in to help to offset it.
Right. So could council, if they so chose, to spend that 17.4 million on other priorities, could they do that? Yes or no?
So Chair, I always like yes, no answers, but the 17.4 is a funding strategy based on Lansdowne 2.0. So if council chooses not to move forward, that funding is not there. If council chooses to move forward, the funding strategy is there with it to be used on that asset.
Yeah, I'm asking a very simple question though. Because we're getting the runaround on this. So very clearly, could council choose to reallocate the $17.4 million in the operating budget to another priority? Yes or no? That's not your
Counselor, this is not a court of law where you're cross-examining staff and forcing them
Excuse me,
to
that's a
only
legitimate
respond with
question.
an answer. You cannot say to staff, you can only say yes or no.
Sorry, I've heard a million councillors say that. So
staff.
So fair enough, let's have an
decided
answer.
How they want to answer a question. And so right now, that's what staff can do.
Sure.
They are asked a
I'm asking
question
a legitimate
and then
question.
I'll move to staff for an answer.
I might want to clarify that all that's in the budget right now is 2.6 million.
Yeah, so I understand the 1.3 builds up to 2036 when it's then 17.4 for 40 years. My question is simple. If council chose to spend that $17.4 million on a different priority, that is within their right to do so.
Councillor, I don't think the question is not a fair question because it's all pretty, the 17.4 today Right now, today, it is 2.6 million. If council chooses to take that 2.6 million and allocate it somewhere else, that's the council's authority to do so. That's what you have before you today, at this point in time.
Right. So yes, we could allocate that to a different priority should we so choose.
Councillor, the 2.6 million, yes.
So ultimately, Counselor, my apologies. If
Okay, I'm asking questions. Can you be quiet?
No. Here.
ultimately, Counselor, it's council's decision in terms of what they want to do. We've put a package in front of council with respect to our recommendations based on the direction that council has given us to bring Lansdowne to where it is today. I think what my colleague is saying is with respect to the 17.4, if our revenues come to fruition, that's fantastic, right? Because that's going to cover off the cost of what we've said it's going to take to do the new event center, to build the north side stands, to build the retail. And I think there's going to be some residual revenues available, and council could then decide in terms of what it is that they would like to do and where they'd like to point those funds.
Yeah. So, sorry, I was just called a swear word by my colleague here next to me, and an asshole and swearing at me. So I'm a little bit,
Counselor, can we be careful with our language on mic, please?
Now, I'm getting sworn at beside me here while I'm talking. So
Something I think you'll have to deal with after this meeting, and I ask councillors to please be respectful to everyone at all times.
yeah, I'd agree. Listen, the reason I'm asking about the 17.4 and trying to get a clear and simple answer is that it seems we haven't done any cost benefit analysis for any other spending priority outside of this. Is that correct for the 17.4?
That is not correct.
That is correct. We've done cost benefit analysis of where we could have spent 17.4 million on another project. Sorry, your mic.
Your mic, sorry, wasn't on.
Councillor, we have not been asked to do that. Thank you.
Right. Okay, so that we haven't analyzed how other $17.4 million could be spent. Are there any returns to the city from spending money on any other priority? Things like building retrofits or affordable housing instead of shelters. Are there returns the city can have from investing money in other areas?
I believe that's outside of the scope of the audit. I don't believe that was looked at in terms of the work that the OAG has done. I turn my colleagues in terms of what work has been done in that space, but I don't think that's what we're here talking about today.
And I can appreciate emotions are running high. The reality is we are supposed to be talking about this follow-up audit.
Yeah, I'm talking about the $17.4 million that the Auditor General has said is an opportunity cost in the report that could be spent on other priorities, which we heard confirmed. And I'm trying to elicit the fact that we're choosing to spend on one thing and not something else that could bring returns, Chair, if I can just continue with my.
It's a great thing to clarify.
Thank
It is, honestly. I think that it maybe requires longer clarification. So
Can I continue with my questions, Chair?
yeah, 100%. I'm just
Fantastic.
encouraging you.
Fantastic. So what is the return on investment for the city in investing the $694 million over that time? How much are we going to get back on top of that $694 million cash wise?
So there's $658 million in revenues expected over that period of time. And then on top of that, there's an 85 million net profit after the debt is paid off going forward until 2075.
Okay. So the $658 million back on it. How much does the city get on its return on investments for, say, like the endowment fund? What percentage are we getting back?
Through the chair, we get in the range of 6%, 6.5%.
6.5% is what I thought as well. So if we theoretically invested $694 million into a 6.5% return, yes, there's some debt repayment that we've got on that 4%. Our percentage return would actually be higher than our percentage return under Lansdowne 2.0. And the reason I'm bringing this up, Chair, is that we have, I'm getting every song and dance here about the fact that the $17.4 million can't be spent anywhere else. And it's such a central talking point here, but that's just not true. If council chose to spend it somewhere else, they could. And in fact, they could get higher returns for that investment on other potential projects or investments that they're doing. And so I don't want this to be, portrayed as this is just the best investment we could ever make. That is not true. We can make other investments, get returns back. More than Lansdowne 2.0 would provide us in returns, and council could make that choice of spending that 17.4 million elsewhere. Chair, I'll move on. The Auditor General identified waterfall distributions that may not come to pass, downside risk on 53 million, 31 million, 30.9 million. Does staff agree that those are risks that could potentially materialize?
The Chair, not in combination, but yes, there is a risk that those could materialize.
Okay, thank you for that. We heard earlier that the MAT is only being used it's only come about because of Lansdowne. So why are we if that's the case, why are we increasing it by 20% instead of just say 8%, which we would then cover the amount set to be delivered to Lansdowne 2.0?
As part of the discussions, it was to invest in tourism initiatives and infrastructure overall. And so it was a win-win consideration, while at the same time taking into consideration the benefit that Lansdowne would bring towards tourism.
Okay.
The investment in those initiatives.
And Chair, just for additional context as well, when we did have those discussions, we did do some benchmarking, and there's a number of municipalities that are at the 6%. There are a number that are above 6%, but there are common average across the industry would be 6% at the municipal level.
Okay, I appreciate that. What do staff see as the greatest risk in Lansdowne 2.0? What are the greatest risks in this project?
Can I just remind everyone that we want to speak to this audit?
Yeah, Chair, the audit points out risks, not all of them, because our auditor didn't have time to study everything, but I'm asking staff a risk question that is in order based on the fact that we've got an audit that points out risks in front of us. I'm asking what staff see as the greatest risk in Lansdowne 2.0.
Fair enough. This could be a question at council. Like, if you can directly relate this to a specific point of this recommendation, the 3 recommendations, that would be helpful.
Chair, I've already stated it, but I'll state it again. The Auditor General has gone through the risks to council in Lansdowne 2.0 in several areas.
So maybe make that specific to those areas.
So I'm asking if staff can please describe what risk, the greatest risk that they see for Lansdowne 2.0. If they're in the report, fantastic. If they're outside the report, I'm more concerned for sure. So it's a simple question, I think.
So I might just say that in the report, there's an entire section called financial risk analysis that describes those key risks for financial risks.
Right. And what is the greatest risk in Lansdowne 2.0 for staff?
There's not one great overriding risk. There are multiple risks that could not all occur at the same time. Those are described in the financial risk analysis section. And we provided a sensitivity analysis for each one. It could be borrowing risk, the cost to borrow. It could be waterfall distributions, those types of risks. But they're described in the report.
Okay. Was Mirabella put through a financial performance exercise for one of the delegations questions?
So, Chair, typically when we sell property, we do not go through the pro forma analysis. Is really for the developer to go through that exercise to assess the opportunities on the site and to see whether they can, generate a profit, which is their goal. What we do is look to ensure that the city's interests are protected. And so we introduce a number of conditions and deposit amounts, or you can look at those as penalties. We also assess the financial viability of the proponent, and we've done that in a couple of ways. One is through endorsements from financial institutions and other professionals to indicate that they have had dealings of a similar magnitude with the proponent in the past, that they are in good standing, that they've successfully concluded and paid off their debts to those organizations. And we have included in this particular deal a financial viability test prior to closing on the deal to ensure that the financing for the entire project is in place. And that is because once that project once we get to that stage, we're quite late in the process and it becomes a little bit more difficult for us to go through a new RFO process. We really want to ensure that everything's in place for that project to conclude successfully.
Okay. Thank you for that. And why didn't we get more bids for the air rights sale? We just got 2 of them. So in your view, we didn't have more. What was the reason for that? Do you think?
Is this related to this audit?
Well, it is in that we have one partner that has penalties to leave. If not, then we're going to go out to bid more, another tender process, and we only got 2 bids. So I'm concerned that if the risk comes to fruition that the Auditor General has pointed out, that we may have another tender process with not a lot of bids.
Through the chair. So I think that question is difficult to answer. I can maybe name a few factors in there. So when we started the process of structuring the requests for offer, we were at a different point. This would be prior to this year. And so in the period of time from when we're structuring the deal to when we were closing that, a number of things in the world changed, including relationship with our trade partners, including economic uncertainty, softening of some real estate markets, in particular in larger centers and that type of thing. So I would imagine that those would be factors that would be considered. And I would say that with all of that considered, receiving multiple bids on this particular site does demonstrate that we have a strong opportunity for this development.
Thank you very much. And my last question, Chair, is
Your time's actually up.
Okay,
Counselor,
right. So
so you can
last
go back on the
last
list.
one, if you'd like.
Is it a very long one?
No, it's not.
Okay, quickly then.
The only question is, what are the costs that OSEG is paying for 2.0? I know there's business interruption costs. What are the actual costs that OSEG is paying for 2.0?
So they're continuing to pay the net negative cash flows going forward.
Okay, so there's nothing outside of the 16 million in business interruption costs?
During the construction period, they continue to pay net negative cash flows and business interruption costs.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. And I'm going to go to the city clerk right now, actually for some clarity on the rules of decorum and what we are supposed to be speaking about. If the clerk could clarify for everyone the bylaw.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Section 42 of the procedure bylaw provides that in council and in committee, no member shall speak disrespectfully of, and I'm paraphrasing, includes the reigning sovereign, any member of the royal family, the governor general, the lieutenant governor of any province, or any member of council or staff, use offensive words or unparliamentary language, speak on any subject other than the subject in debate, where a matter has been discussed in camera and where the matter remains confidential, disclose the content of the matter or the substance of the deliberations of the in-camera meeting, or disobey the rules of procedures or the decision of the chair or the council on questions of order or practice or upon the interpretation of the rules of procedure.
Thank you for that clarity. All right. The next speaker in terms of members, Councillor Bradley.
Thank you so much, Chair, and thanks to staff. The Auditor General had identified the potential sale of the air right transaction as a risk, and that if Mirabella were to walk away, there would be $13 million in liquidated damages. And my question is, if that was to occur, would that $13 million be an equity contribution to the project?
No.
And I guess why not?
So equity contribution to the project is in relation to the Northside Stands and Event Center construction costs.
I guess I would just question that only because one of the conditions in which Mirabella could walk away is if those that construction falls off timeline, therefore it being a direct result of the failed timeline, therefore potentially could be considered an equity contribution as a result. Was that ever discussed at any point?
It wasn't considered within the scope of what the equity contribution definition was.
Okay, thank you. I might have follow-up questions before council on that one. Another risk that the Auditor General identified is business interruption costs, and that the city had committed to paying 50%, and the estimated amount was 32 million. So the city's portion would be 16 million. Is that a cap at 16 million, or is there potential for that to escalate?
There's a potential for that to be lower or higher. We did do a sensitivity analysis on that, and it's a couple of million either way.
And if it does go over that 32 million, is it still split 50-50?
Correct.
And it's an equity share contribution for both parties.
Correct.
With respect to reporting to council, one of the recommendations was that obviously this is a very complex deal and that staff had committed to coming, I think, semi-annually to council to report on progress. Is that right?
Madam Chair, that would be on the construction project itself. So we are committing to coming to committee and council twice, or reporting back twice a year.
And given that there are many risks related to revenue, and that when many of those are coming once the construction is over, is staff still committed to providing regular updates to committee with respect to how that's going?
So that would be part of the annual report. We would now start to report on the projections as we do today, but how they impact the overall funding strategy.
And so I've seen many of those annual reports, and they often really focus on the positives of Lansdowne, like visitors to the site, events that we've held. The financial impact is usually not as widely reported on with respect to the staff report. And a big part of this project is that this will only cost $4.3 million annually over the lifetime of the partnership for taxpayers. Would it be fair to have in each of those reports sort of an indicator of the taxpayer contribution average over the lifetime of the partnership in each successive report, assuming that that's going to keep going down as we get out towards 2075?
That's what we've committed to do, to compare the most current projections to what we had projected as part of this business case.
Okay, thank you. And then I might need to take this one offline, and it's about the risk identified for unrealized revenue. But there was conversations at committee around how we determined the city's pro rata share of equity contributions. And I just want to understand the formula, because it may or may not be relevant here, or I might need to take it to council. But is it the city's cash contributions minus potential revenue, and that's how we determine our pro rata share?
Construction costs, and then any revenue, new revenue sources would be deducted, the net present value.
Okay, so it's not so how we forecast our equity share right now, is it potential, like based on our forecast, or is it like, will it be adjusted as actual revenues come in?
So some of them are based on projections, some are based on actual. So for example, property tax uplift would be based on actual property tax uplift.
Okay, because one of the risks identified by the AG was that if the proportion of condo and rental market were to shift, that could have a negative impact on the amount of property tax revenue we would receive over the lifetime of the partnership. And so how does that affect the actuals as determined our pro rata share of the equity contributions?
So, Chair, I can't speak to the pro rata share calculation because it's a bit of math I can't do quickly. But if we did include in the report a variance analysis and sensitivity analysis, if it was 100% rental, that would impact the annual impact would be about $400K per year.
So is it safe to assume that if these revenues don't realize, that our equity share would increase as a result if they wouldn't be deducted? Like, I'm just trying to, does that make sense, that question?
So if the cost of construction to the city increases or the revenue shares decrease, our equity contribution increases.
And is that the same for OSEG then? Like, obviously they don't share in the construction cost overruns, but they would share in potential revenue through the waterfall distribution. So how does that change their equity share if they're continuing to cover?
Yeah, so if our equity share goes up, theirs goes down. If they continue to have to pay net negative cash flows, their share goes up, ours goes down.
And then my last question is around construction overruns that were risks identified within the report. And I'm finding it really difficult to understand. I mean, there are a lot of people around this table who have been at the City of Ottawa for a very long time and who worked in Lansdowne 1.0, that nobody can tell us what the cost overruns for Lansdowne 1.0. Obviously, OSEG was responsible for cost overruns, but as a result, their equity share was increasing because there were cost overruns. So is nobody around this table, I know Mr. Box, you worked really closely with Kent Kirkpatrick at the time, can nobody tell us what the cost overruns were for Lansdowne 1.0?
Chair, I can speak to the most significant one, which is the steel frame loan, which was settled and paid off through the loan in the partnership rather than paying OSEG 8% interest. So it was reduced from their equity contribution.
And any other cost overruns that we're aware of?
I have to cycle back to OSEG, but as Roger Greenberg indicated, the cost overruns were dictated by the Lansdowne Urban Design Review Panel. So they were changes to the cladding, to the exterior and enhancements above and beyond what the design originally was for the construction of the site. I can't recall exactly, but we can investigate that to be
It would
able.
be helpful to have that information because, you know, Roger Greenberg said that it was as a result, as you said, the Urban Review Design Panel of city caused delays that contributed to the largest amount of the deficit. And in this plan, we are responsible for those city delays. So I just wanted to highlight that risk because the AG had made it very clear. And Roger Greenberg, who was responsible for those cost overruns in Lansdowne 1.0, said that that was the largest contributor. So having that information just to do a little bit of comparison would be helpful. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Devine.
Thank you, Chair. So I do want to keep my questions on within scope, and really I just want to, I guess, get staff's perspective on a few of the items of concern raised with the AG. So, and forgive me for, beating almost dead horses here. But again, on the issue of the question of the cost of doing nothing. So I remember being on a tour of my ward with a couple of staff from roads and public works, and we were talking about, the need for maintenance. And I asked them how much would they need to allocate in their annual maintenance budgets in order to bring it up to service standards. And they both kind of, had a little giggle, and their giggle interpreted the fact that we don't allocate nearly as much to our annual maintenance budgets what they'd like to if we were to achieve that standard. So on the issue of the cost of doing nothing, isn't it fair to say that even a road whose level of service should dictate that it should be maintained or replaced this year, but it doesn't because we don't have enough, it's below the line, and it gets maintained or replaced, let's say 3 years from now, the cost of doing nothing applies to that asset as well, doesn't it?
Chair, I think as it was answered maybe differently, but a similar answer is if Lansdowne 2.0 does not proceed, there is a risk that the full cost of replacement and renewal of those assets would come to the asset management plans and would need in the magnitude of between $700 and $800 million, which currently there is no financial strategy for.
And again, because we are allocating public money in one direction and we have all kinds of powers within ourselves to make decisions about where we choose to allocate public funding. The cost of not maintaining any asset when that asset is due for maintenance, there is a cost to delaying that maintenance, isn't there? That's a very, very technical, simple question.
Yeah, so thank you for the clarification, Chair. So in asset management terms, there is definitely a cost benefit curve, and the longer that you wait to intervene in renewal or replacement, the costlier it gets.
And that applies to everything, whether it be to Lansdowne or to a road or to another recreation center.
Yes, that's correct, Chair. And also what I would say is that not all assets have the same type of risk profile or criticality. So we may allow a different risk yeah.
So now I do want to just focus in a bit more on the, on the principles and the issues surrounding opportunity cost, because I know that it is an issue that does resonate with at least most people that I speak to. And I did hear, a comment that I know to be true, that if not for Lansdowne 2.0, these new revenues would not be available. I know that that those new revenues are part of the funding strategy. One of those new revenues is the property tax uplift. And it was even described to me that the 17.4 translates optimistically to 4.3 because all of those other revenues are the revenues that we anticipate and hope getting. And they were even described as not even city revenues. But on the issue of the property tax uplift, because that is one of the net new revenues that will offset the 17.4 towards being 4.3. And those property tax that increase in property valuation, property tax, I beg your pardon, is being applied to the debt. But there's nothing that mandates that any development's increase in tax uplift must be allocated towards that project's debt, is there? That's a choice we're making, isn't it?
So if I can clarify, we're not allocating to the debt these new sources of revenue. They're offsetting the cost. It is uplift that we expect in our budgets in future years that could be used towards tax supported services.
But we are putting 17.4 on the debt, knowing that the money from the uplift would be elsewhere on our big, massive budget of revenues.
It will help to offset it in those future years.
And so theoretically, in a hypothetical world, we could, rather than have 17.4 million on the debt, we could have X from the property tax uplift and put it where the 17.4 is, correct?
So every year we include in our budget the growth component to our budget to make it balance. It's a business case. It's not, the funding strategy is separate from the business case. The business case says, if not for this, this would not happen.
Okay, well, then more simply, generally, property tax uplift just goes into general coffers. Generally.
Correct.
We're making a slight deviation from that here. Again,
If I may, sorry, just. I think what's important too is just remembering what we placed in front of council through those successive approvals.
Yeah.
Part of that was the overall funding strategy with respect to Lansdowne, right? And included in the funding strategy was the allocation of the property taxes, 75% in terms of looking at what those puts and takes are as to how we're going to rebuild, renew, and pay for those things.
thank you. And I appreciate that you said that this is what we're doing as per this funding strategy. And to get to my colleague, Councilor Menard's question about what we could do with the 17.4 million. You are all answering the question dutifully, because you are answering the question according to the strategy that has been advanced by council. You have been directed to advance a financial strategy whereby, yes. And so when Councilor Menard asks, can that 17.4 million be allocated elsewhere? Of course, the answer is no, because you're answering based on that strategy. So in a hypothetical world, because what council has done is council has decided to advance a project, and council has decided to advance a strategy to finance that project. And you've created a financing strategy for that project. In a hypothetical world, because opportunity costs speak to, we, through this, bless you, are directing funds in this way, but we could, in a hypothetical world, or even in this world here, direct funds anywhere. So on the question of, could not that 17.4 million be directed elsewhere, but could 17.4 million, notice I haven't specified which one, be directed elsewhere? So in a hypothetical world, could council have decided to make priority funding transit to the need that we need it? And could council have come up with a strategy to fund through debt $694 million worth of transit, that you could have come up with a strategy to pay it off through 17.4 million per year?
Councillor Devine?
It's addressing the issue.
This
of
hypothetical world question, though, has nothing to do with this audit.
It does, in the fact that the council has
You're asking staff to predict a hypothetical world. That is not related to the 3 recommendations in front of us. If you have a question about the 3 recommendations in front of us that is not a hypothetical world question, that would be helpful. And you have about 1 second left on the clock.
Is it within scope to ask staff their responses to the main points that are raised as the issues of concern by the AG?
You can ask that at council, but right now we're asking staff questions on the 3 recommendations from the Auditor General and their responses.
Okay, thank you. I'll reserve it for council.
Councillor Tierney.
Great. Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll get back on topic. Just curious, looking at this model here, and I've brought this up before, and I brought it up when we were at questions of the auditor. Have we used models like this for other things? And I'm bringing this back again. You know, we've done different models where I work with partners, whether it's Champlain Arts or the paramedic units. Have there been similar kind of risks? I mean, I've never seen any project go perfectly, but I assume we build in the appropriate amount of risk with those projects as this. And I'm I always wonder if I should grab my NIMBY Tears glass in a situation like this, because this seems to be the only one. We do it for other sports arenas. We do it for theaters. Maybe it can just add to that.
Yeah, through the chair. So yes, every project that we do, there's always a risk assessment on it. Every report that we bring forward to committee and council, there's a risk assessment there, and we highlight those risks. Specifically, when you look at large construction projects, whether it's at Asoke, the paramedic Donry paramedic center, the art gallery, the South Police facility, those risks are always looked at. We look at those risks from a construction timing perspective, a cost perspective, cost overrun perspective. It's all there. Even if I were to really carve the onion down from a risk mitigation perspective, our capital closure process is one of the few municipalities in Ontario that actually has a capital close process, where I actually looked it up last night. In the past 5 years, we've returned over $325 million worth of funds to source funding. Now there's a little bit, I'll be clear, a little bit skewed because in 2020 and 2021, as part of our pandemic financing strategy, in terms of what we didn't know for the first time in history, we were going into a pandemic. All of our construction projects were at risk, so we kind of deferred that. That was a strategy we used. We came in on the other side of that, and we were able to get those projects back in progress and executed. So again, that's another layer of risk that we do. For me, and in my role, I need to look at the global risks across the entire organization.
Yeah.
So when these types of reports come forward, I look at this funding strategy and this funding plan. When we talk about risks, yeah, the revenue projections are risks, but they're low risks. We've taken a conservative approach in terms of, making sure that we're conservative on those projections. There's a likelihood that they'll exceed that. We'll be in a better position. When I look at the other things that have been through this process, KPMG, Deloitte, EY, the OAG, it's been there. That's why my confidence and comfort is where it is today, because of all those risk mitigations that the team has done, and I layer on top of that as we bring it before council.
Great. I'll save the rest for council, but thank you for your diligence on this one. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Councillor Hill.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. One of my colleagues questioned the overall return on investment that will come from a city investment in Lansdowne 2.0. And the response that we got back from staff spoke specifically to the Lansdowne project. But I do want to just confirm, have not all of Ottawa's economic development partners, such as the Ottawa Board of Trade, Invest Ottawa, the Ottawa Coalition of Business Improvement Areas, Ottawa Business Journal, the local Glebe and Bank Street Business Associations, all of these, have they not highlighted the second order benefits from a job creation and an economic development perspective in the community?
Yes, Chair, they have.
And when we factor that in, I think the numbers that I saw were approximately $500 million in GDP estimated over the next 10 years, with hundreds, if not thousands, of short-term construction jobs available. How does, maybe it's a bit of a hypothetical, but how does the city value that when we look at the numbers and the assessment value that we're looking at with Lansdowne 2.0 as we go forward?
Chair, from an economic development perspective, we do see a lot of value in this particular project in terms of job creation and GDP growth generation, and that was supported by the Deloitte, who undertook the third-party assessment, as well as you mentioned earlier, all of the economic development partners that the city does work with. And the other point that I just raised quickly in response to that is that Deloitte did call out that at this point in time, with the economic uncertainty that we're facing, that this type of construction project is an important economic stimulus and can help replace some of the kind of downside aspects that we're seeing in the economy currently and perhaps in the future.
One of our delegates this morning spoke to the financial strength of the CFL and that many teams are losing money, and as such, the future concerns risks regarding the viability of teams, specifically looking at the Red Blacks. Could you or perhaps OSEG speak to this risk?
You'd have to take a seat, so we have a mic.
Chair, if I may.
Yes, I was going to ask this.
Have nothing to do with our audit whatsoever. So I'm sorry. It's not that I don't want to hear what OSEG has to say. It's just we are really getting very far. We did not even get the economic impact report from staff until a couple weeks before we gave them a draft report. There are no aspects in our audit about that, nothing whatsoever.
Thank you.
I'll defer to your ruling, Madam Chair, but I would say from an economic perspective, we're talking a lot about what the financing of this project is going to look like over the next long term. So to ask a specific question about the viability of the Red Blacks, which is something that the delegate this morning himself brought up, I think is fair game.
So the recommendation by the Auditor General is that we monitor this as we go, right? That's the third recommendation, that is what she's recommending, that we get consistent updates. So I think that unless you feel that there's something right now, I think that we will get those updates as we go if this project is approved. That's a question for us to ask later on.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? All right. Well, I just have a couple of quick comments. Lansdowne 1.0 had a significant risk that nobody anticipated when we talk about risks, which was the pandemic. In the risks that we are looking at here, and we are going to be monitoring, would you say that we will get updates only every year if we happen to have another pandemic, an earthquake like we've had here in Ottawa, a tornado like we've had here in Ottawa, a flood like we've had here in Ottawa, a derecho like we've had here in Ottawa? Would it only be annual updates?
Chair, if there was an issue such as you speak about, that would come to council's attention as soon as we possibly could.
Right. And so I asked that because this is, as the Auditor General indicated, about risk and risk appetite. And that is really the question before us here. And what we do as an audit committee is we ask, what are some risks? Have we considered them all? What is the staff response that we can be assured of for mitigating those risks? And that's what we're actually doing here as an audit committee, which is what the job of the audit committee is. Not to debate whether or not you go forward with the project or not, but whether or not what the risks are and whether they're mitigated. So thank you everyone for the questions and comments. And so what we have here still is a recommendation, which is simply that the audit committee receive the follow-up report and recommend that council consider and approve the recommendations. Is this recommendation carried?
Carried.
And the last thing we have is adjournment. Our next meeting is Friday, November 28th, which is not that far away. Thank you, everyone. We are adjourned.